Millionaire follows a food delivery driver, and the story he discovers touches his heart. Richard Anderson adjusted the knot of his Italian tie as he gazed out the window of his 20th floor office. At 52, he had built a real estate empire that spanned the entire metropolitan area of New York City. But at that moment, something different caught his attention on the bustling streets below. A delivery driver in an orange cap had stopped his motorcycle right in front of the building that housed the headquarters of Anderson Enterprises. The man carefully dismounted, carrying a red insulated backpack, and walked toward the entrance lobby. Richard watched as the young man politely greeted the doorman, handed over an order, and hurried back to his motorcycle. But what really caught Richard's attention was what happened next. Instead of speeding off to his next delivery, the driver stopped near an underground passageway close to the building. 3 children sat on the concrete steps, clearly homeless. The man opened his insulated backpack and pulled something out. Richard leaned forward, pressing his face against the window pane. The delivery driver was handing out food to the children. Not scraps or leftovers, but what looked like full hot meals served in proper containers. The scene lasted only a few minutes, but something tightened in Richard's chest in a way he couldn't explain. When the driver finally left, the 3 children remained seated there, eating eagerly as they chatted among themselves. Richard stayed by the window a few minutes longer, but his mind was no longer focused on the financial reports waiting on his desk. A strange curiosity had settled in his thoughts, something he hadn't felt in years. The next day, around the same time, Richard found himself glued to the window again, and there he was once more. The same delivery driver, the same routine. Delivery to the building, a stop at the underground passageway, food for the children. This time, Richard decided to go downstairs. He told the doorman he needed to check something at the entrance and positioned himself discreetly behind a lobby column. When the driver arrived, he could observe him up close. The man looked about 35, with dark hair under a faded orange cap, wearing a yellow t-shirt that had seen better days. His movements were quick but careful, and when he spoke to the doorman, Richard noticed his polite voice and the genuine smile he offered despite clearly being exhausted. When the driver approached the children, Richard followed at a safe distance. Hidden behind a pillar near the entrance to the underground passageway, he could hear part of the conversation. "Hey kids, how are you all today?" said the driver, crouching to their level. "Uncle Michael," exclaimed a girl of about 8. "Lily had nightmares again last night." Michael looked at the younger girl, who was probably around 6, and gently stroked her messy hair. "Hey Lily, want to tell Uncle Michael about your dream?" The girl shook her head but leaned in for a warm hug. "It's okay, sweetheart. Look what I brought today." Michael opened his backpack and pulled out 3 still warm meal containers. Richard could smell the homemade food even from a distance. "Today we've got rice, beans, grilled chicken, and a little salad. And for dessert," he paused dramatically, drawing smiles from the children, "flan." The 3rd child, a boy who looked the oldest at about 10, took one of the containers with reverence. "Thank you, Uncle Michael. We haven't eaten properly since yesterday morning." "Don't mention it, Tommy. You know you can always count on me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Richard felt a tightness in his chest upon hearing those words. How long had those children been on the streets? And how long had Michael been feeding them? In the days that followed, Richard found himself making excuses to be in the building's lobby during the time Michael usually appeared, always watching from a distance, always trying to better understand the situation that had stirred something dormant within him. It was during his 5th observation that Richard noticed something concerning. Michael seemed thinner, his movements a little slower. When he handed out food to the children that day, Richard realized he didn't eat anything with them, as he had done in previous days. Richard's curiosity was turning into something deeper, a need to understand, to learn more about this man who gave up his own sustenance to feed 3 unknown children. That night, Richard couldn't focus on the dinner prepared by his housekeeper in his luxurious penthouse. The gourmet food tasted bland as he thought about the simple meals Michael distributed every day. His wife Jennifer noticed his distraction. "Richard, are you all right? You've barely touched your food." Just thinking about some work matters, he replied, avoiding details. Jennifer, accustomed to her husband's silence when it came to business, didn't press further. But Richard knew this had nothing to do with work. It was personal, something that shook his convictions in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. On the 6th day of observation, something different happened. Michael arrived at the building, as usual, but this time he was accompanied by another delivery worker. They spoke briefly before Michael went on his usual route. When he approached the children, the other worker followed. Richard noticed Michael introducing his co-worker to the children, explaining the situation. "This is Brian," Michael told the kids. "He also works with me making deliveries, and if one day I can't come, he'll take care of you, okay?" The children nodded shyly at Brian, who smiled back and helped Michael distribute the food that day. After the children began eating, Richard saw Michael and Brian talking a short distance away. Though he couldn't hear the full conversation, he caught a few scattered words: money and family and can't keep going. An alarm went off in Richard's mind. Was Michael facing financial trouble? Was that why he looked thinner, more exhausted? That night, Richard made a decision. He needed to know more about Michael. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because something inside him screamed that this man needed help. The next day, instead of just observing, Richard decided to act. He left the building and casually walked toward the underpass just as Michael was preparing to leave. "Excuse me," Richard said, approaching the delivery worker. Michael turned, surprised. Rarely did anyone stop him during his deliveries, especially not a well-dressed man like this. "Yes, sir? Can I help you with something?" Richard hesitated for a moment. How could he explain he'd been watching him for a week? How could he bring this up without seeming intrusive? I work in that building over there," he said, pointing to the Anderson Enterprises office, "and I've noticed you feeding those children every day. It's a very kind thing you're doing." Michael blushed slightly, seeming uncomfortable with the praise. "Oh, it's nothing special. They need to eat, right? And I always have a little extra from my deliveries." But Richard had observed enough to know that wasn't true. Michael was buying that food with his own money. "What's your name?" "Michael, sir. Michael Johnson." "Pleasure to meet you, Michael. I'm Richard." They shook hands, and Richard noticed how Michael's hands were calloused from work, in contrast to his own soft ones. "How long have you been doing this?" "Feeding the children, I mean." Michael looked at the 3 kids who were still eating a little ways off. "About 3 months. When I started making deliveries in this area, I always saw them here. One day it was raining hard and they were soaked, hungry. I couldn't just walk past." "And their family? Their parents?" Michael's face darkened. "It's complicated, Mr. Anderson. Tommy, the oldest, told me their mother, she passed a few months ago. The father disappeared long before that. They live with an aunt who's far from here and works 2 jobs. Sometimes she forgets to leave food or there's no money to buy any." Richard felt his heart tighten even more. Those children weren't completely abandoned, but they were clearly neglected. "And can you afford to keep helping them?" Michael lowered his gaze, confirming Richard's suspicions. I do what I can, sir. But it hasn't been easy. I have my own family to take care of, too. You have children. 3, 2 girls and a boy. My wife's been out of work for 6 months, so I'm the only one supporting the house right now." Richard did the math quickly in his head. Michael was feeding 3 street kids while supporting a family of 5 on just his delivery salary. How did he manage? "Michael, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, sir. How much do you spend a day feeding these children?" Michael hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "It's not important, Mr. Anderson. They need to eat." "But it is important. Are you sacrificing your own family to help these kids?" "No, it's not like that. We make do, always have." But Richard could see from Michael's expression that the situation was far from sustainable. The man was depriving himself, probably skipping meals, to feed not just his family, but also 3 strangers. "Michael, would you let me help?" The question took Michael completely by surprise. "What do you mean, sir?" "I'd like to contribute, so you can keep feeding these children. And maybe we can find a more permanent solution for them." Michael shook his head firmly. "No, Mr. Anderson. I can't accept charity. Thank you for the offer, but I'll manage. It's not charity, Michael. It's solidarity. One person helping another. Even so, sir, I don't feel right taking money from strangers. Richard respected Michael's refusal, but didn't give up on the idea. There was something about that man that moved him deeply. Maybe it was the purity of his motives, or maybe it was the stark contrast between his own life of luxury and the harsh reality Michael faced every day. Can I at least learn more about the children's situation? Maybe I can help in other ways. Michael looked at the kids who had finished eating and were playing with some pebbles on the ground. Tommy's 10, Emma's 8, and Lily's 6. They're siblings. Their aunt, Ms. Margaret, works as a cleaner in 2 different places and sometimes does odd jobs on weekends. She leaves home at 5 in the morning and doesn't get back until after 9 at night, and the children are alone all that time. Theoretically, they should be in school, but Michael sighed. It's complicated. Sometimes they don't have clean uniforms. Sometimes they haven't eaten properly and end up with stomach aches. Sometimes their aunt forgets to give them money for transportation, so they end up skipping school and coming here. Exactly. And here at least I can give them a decent meal. Richard looked at the 3 children with a completely new perspective. They weren't just street kids, as he had initially thought. They were children in a situation of extreme social vulnerability, neglected not out of malice but because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Michael, let me make a different proposal. What kind of proposal? I have resources. You have the heart and the knowledge of the situation. What if we work together to find a real solution for these kids? Michael looked at Richard with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. What exactly do you have in mind? I don't know yet, but I'm sure that together we can find a way to truly help these children without you having to sacrifice so much. Michael was silent for a few moments, watching the children play. Finally, he turned to Richard. Mr. Richard, can I be honest with you? Of course. I've seen plenty of wealthy people make promises to folks like me. In the end, they always disappear when things get too complicated, or when they realize helping for real takes more effort than they imagined. Michael's words hit Richard like a slap in the face. They were harsh, but probably true. How many times had he himself donated to social organizations just to ease his conscience, without ever truly getting involved? You're right to be suspicious, Richard admitted. But I'm not like those people. How can I be sure of that? It was a fair question, and Richard didn't have a ready answer. How could he prove his intentions to someone who had likely been let down before? You can't be sure right now, Richard said honestly, but I can prove it with actions, not words. Michael studied Richard's face for a long moment, as if trying to read his true intentions. What do you suggest? First, that I get to know the situation better. Can I talk to the children's aunt? See where they live? Understand what's really going on? I don't know if Miss Margaret will want to talk to you. She's very wary of strangers. Could you introduce me to her? Michael hesitated again. I can try, but if she says no, you have to respect that. Of course. When do you think it would be possible? Miss Margaret usually gets home around 9:30 at night. If you want, I can talk to her today. And see if she's willing to meet tomorrow. Perfect. How can I reach you? Michael gave Richard his phone number, which Richard saved immediately in his contacts. Michael, one last thing. Yes? Thank you for looking after these kids. What you're doing means far more than most people would do. Michael lowered his gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would do the same in my place. No, Michael, they wouldn't. And that's why I want to help. That night, Richard couldn't focus on anything else. During dinner with Jennifer, his mind was completely fixed on the conversation he'd had with Michael and the 3 children he'd met, even if only from a distance. You seem different today, Jennifer remarked as she cut a piece of salmon. Different how? More thoughtful. More present somehow. Jennifer had known Richard for 15 years, since before he became the successful businessman he was today. She could pick up on subtle changes in his behavior that others might miss. Did something happen at work? Richard considered telling her about Michael and the children, but decided to wait a little longer. First, he wanted to better understand the situation before involving Jennifer. Just some new projects I'm considering, he said. Technically not. Lying. After dinner, Richard locked himself in his personal office in the penthouse. It was a space he had decorated to impress, with expensive furniture and original artwork. But that night it all seemed excessive and unnecessary. He grabbed a calculator and started doing some math. How much would it cost to feed 3 children properly every day? How much to ensure they had clean school uniforms, school supplies, transportation? The numbers he came up with were ridiculously low compared to his wealth. In less than an hour, he spent on business lunches what would be enough to support those 3 children for an entire month. But Michael had made it clear he wouldn't. Accept charity. How do you help someone who doesn't want to be helped? The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Michael. Good evening, Mr. Richard. I spoke with Miss Margaret. And? Did she agree to talk to me? She was very suspicious at first. She asked why a wealthy man would want to get involved in her life. And what did you say? That you saw me feeding the kids and got interested in helping. She didn't like the idea at all. Richard's heart sank. So she refused? Not exactly. She said she'll agree to talk, but only at her house, with neighbors around, and only if I'm there too. Perfect. When? Tomorrow, Saturday, at 3 in the afternoon, Mr. Richard? Yes? Ms. Margaret is a very proud woman. She might seem rude, but it's just protection. Life hasn't been easy for her. I understand. Can you give me the address? Michael gave directions to Ms. Margaret's house, located in an outlying area of the city Richard had never visited. Mr. Richard, can I ask you something? Of course. Please don't wear expensive clothes or drive a flashy car. People there don't like showing off. Richard glanced at his closet full of Italian suits and imported shoes. Dressing simply would be a challenge, but he understood Michael's concern. Don't worry, I'll dress appropriately. On Saturday morning, Richard woke up with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. He'd spent the whole night thinking about how to approach Ms. Margaret, how to earn her trust without sounding condescending. He chose a pair of jeans he rarely wore, a simple polo shirt and basic sneakers. When he looked in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. It had been years since he'd dressed so casually. He decided to take a taxi instead of his imported car, following Michael's advice. During the 40-minute ride to the outskirts, Richard watched as the cityscape gradually changed. The mirrored skyscrapers and luxury condos gave way to modest houses, small shops and less paved streets. Ms. Margaret's house was in a working-class but tidy neighborhood. The homes were small but well kept, with front yards where children played and adults chatted on the sidewalks. Michael was waiting for Richard on the corner, as they'd agreed. I'm glad you came, Michael said, clearly relieved. For a moment, I thought you'd changed your mind. Why would I change my mind? A lot of people do when they see where we live. They walked 2 blocks to a light blue single-story house. The gate was open, and a woman around 40 was sweeping the small front yard. Ms. Margaret, this is Mr. Richard I told you about, Michael said. Margaret stopped sweeping and looked Richard up and down, clearly sizing him up. She was a woman of average height, with black hair tied in a ponytail and a steady gaze that conveyed determination and wariness in equal measure. Good afternoon, Miss Margaret. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me. Margaret didn't respond right away. She finished sweeping the last section of the floor before addressing him. Let's go inside, but I'll say this up front. I don't take handouts from anyone. The inside of the house was simple but extremely clean and tidy. The living room had a 2-seater sofa, a small television, and a few family photos on the walls. The 3 children were sitting on the floor playing with some simple toys. When they saw Richard, they recognized him as the man who had spoken with Michael the day before. Tommy, the oldest, waved timidly. Emma hid behind her younger sister, while Lily just stared curiously. Sit there, Margaret said, pointing to the sofa. Michael told me you want to help the kids. I want to know exactly what you have in mind. Richard sat on the edge of the sofa, trying to appear as unintimidating as possible. Ms. Margaret, first of all, I want you to know I have no intention of judging your situation or interfering with how you care for the children. Then what do you want? I watched Michael feeding the kids for a week. I saw them spending their days on the streets instead of in school. And I'd like to better understand the situation to see if there's any way to help. Margaret crossed her arms, her posture defensive. You think I don't take good care of them? No, that's not it. Michael explained that you work hard and do the best you can, but maybe there are some difficulties that could be eased with support. What kind of support? Richard took a deep breath. This was the crucial moment. Practical challenges, school supplies, uniforms, transportation, meals, things that might be keeping the kids from attending school regularly. Margaret looked at the children, then at Michael, and finally back at Richard. And what do you want in return? The question caught Richard off guard. What do you mean? Nobody helps for free, Mr. Anderson. There's always something behind it. You want the kids on TV, you want to use them for some campaign at your company. What do you want? Richard realized Margaret had looked him up. She knew who he was. I don't want anything in return, Miss Margaret. Honestly. Everybody wants something, especially rich folks like you. Michael stepped into the conversation. Ms. Margaret, I spent the whole week talking with Mr. Anderson. I think he's sincere. You're naive, Michael. People like him don't do anything without expecting something back. Richard felt the weight of Margaret's words. She was right to be suspicious. In his business world, no one really did anything without expecting something in return. You're right to be wary, Richard said. In my world, people always want something. But this time, it's different. Why? What's so special about us? It was a hard question to answer. Richard wasn't even sure himself what had driven him to get involved. Honestly, I can't explain it well. But when I saw Michael feeding those kids, something inside me changed. It's been a long time since I've seen such a pure act of kindness. Margaret studied Richard's face for a long moment. Do you have children? No, I don't. Then you don't understand what it means to be responsible for a child. You're right, I don't. But I'd like to learn. Why? Again, Richard found himself without a clear answer. Because I think I've been living in a bubble for too long. And these kids, yet they showed me a reality I'd been ignoring. Tommy, who had been listening to the conversation in silence, approached Richard. Sir, do you know my mother? The innocent question brought an awkward silence to the room. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if the question were too painful. No, Tommy, I didn't know your mother, Richard replied gently. Was she as pretty as Aunt Margaret? I'm sure she was, Tommy. Michael walked over to Tommy and pulled him affectionately onto his lap. Tommy, how about you and your sisters go play in the backyard while the adults talk? The children obediently left, leaving the three adults alone in the room. My sister passed away 4 months ago, Margaret said, her voice quieter now. She had been sick for a while but hid it from everyone. By the time we found out, it was too late. I'm so sorry, Richard said sincerely. She was a single mother. The children's father never took responsibility. So when she left, the children came to live with me. And you're taking care of them? Alone? Yes, I'm also a single mother. I have a 15-year-old daughter, Ashley. She studies in the morning and works in the afternoon to help at home. Richard began to understand the complexity of the situation. Margaret was raising 4 children alone, working 2 jobs. And yet, the children were being neglected not for lack of love, but for lack of time and resources. Miss Margaret, may I ask some practical questions? Go ahead. Are the children enrolled in school? They are, but it's hard to keep them. There. The uniforms tear and it takes me a while to save up for new ones. Sometimes there's no money for transportation. Sometimes I forget to pack their lunches because I get home too late from work and leave too early. Isn't there any social program that could help? Margaret let out a bitter laugh. Mr. Richard, to get help from the government, you need time to wait in line at public offices. You need up-to-date paperwork. You need to chase documents. I leave home at 5 in the morning and get back at 9:30 at night. When would I have time for that? What about on weekends? On weekends, I work as a house cleaner to make ends meet. And when I'm not working, I'm taking care of the house, doing laundry, cooking for the week. Richard began to see how poverty was a cruel trap. Margaret was stuck in a cycle where she had to work so much to survive that she had no time to look for solutions that could improve her situation in the long run. Miss Margaret, what if I offered to handle the paperwork, find available social programs, fill out the necessary forms, follow up on the processes? Margaret looked at him with renewed suspicion. In exchange for what? Nothing. Just so the children can access the resources they're entitled to. You'd do that? Yes, and more. Until those programs come through, I'd like to cover the basic costs. Uniforms, school supplies, transportation, food. Margaret abruptly stood up from the couch. No, I already said I won't accept charity. It's not charity, Miss Margaret. It's an investment in these children's future. Yes, it is charity, and I have my dignity. Michael tried to mediate. Miss Margaret, maybe we can think of a different way. No, Michael. I know how to take care of my children. It may not be perfect, but it's with dignity. Richard felt he was losing Margaret. He needed a different approach. Miss Margaret, may I tell you a story? What story? The story of how I became rich. Margaret sat back down, curious despite her irritation. When I was a child, my family was very poor. My father was a bricklayer, and my mother took in laundry. We lived in a house like this one, in a neighborhood like this. Margaret seemed surprised by the revelation. I only managed to study because a local businessman decided to sponsor a few poor boys to take a technical course. He paid for everything: supplies, transportation, uniforms, everything. And he never asked for anything in return. And then, that course changed my life. It gave me the knowledge to get a better job, which allowed me to go to college, which opened doors for me to start my own business. Are you saying you also received charity? I am, and it took me a long time to accept it. At the time, my father was furious. He said we didn't need anyone's help, that he had dignity. And my mother convinced him that accepting help wasn't losing dignity, it was securing opportunity. She said something I've never forgotten. Pride doesn't put food on the table or books in a child's hands. Margaret fell silent, clearly moved by the story. Ms. Margaret, I don't want to take away your dignity. I want to honor the memory of these children's mother by giving them the opportunities she might have wanted for them. How do I know you won't give up halfway? Because the man who helped me when I was a boy never gave up, and now I'm in a position to pay it forward. Michael was watching the conversation closely, noticing Margaret was starting to soften. Ms. Margaret, how about we start small? Richard suggested. What if I just make sure the kids have school uniforms and supplies for this month? If it works out, we'll talk about next steps. Margaret looked out the window to the backyard, where the three children were playing with sticks, creating an imaginary world to entertain themselves. And if I agree, will you try to dictate how I raise them? Never. They're your responsibility. I just want to remove some practical obstacles. What if I want to stop the help halfway? Then we stop, no questions asked. Margaret took a deep breath. Fine, but just uniforms and supplies for this month. And if I sense you have ulterior motives, it all ends. Richard felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Thank you for trusting me, Ms. Margaret. I'm not trusting, I'm testing. In the days that followed, Richard discovered turning money into practical help was more complicated than he'd imagined. First, he had to figure out where to buy school uniforms. Then he needed to understand what supplies each child required, given their different ages and grades. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. Michael became his guide in this new world. Together, they visited discount stores, located the children's schools, and spoke with their teachers to better understand each child's specific needs. Tommy was in 5th grade and struggled with math. Emma was in 3rd grade and the most studious of the three, but very shy. Lily had just started 1st grade and was still adjusting to the school environment. Lily has frequent nightmares, her teacher explained to Richard and Michael. Probably related to grieving her mother. Sometimes she comes to school very sleepy. Is there any way to help with that? Richard asked. Ideally, she'd get counseling, but we know that's not within the family's means, right? Now, Richard mentally noted another need. The list was growing, but he didn't feel overwhelmed. On the contrary, each new discovery motivated him even more. After a week sorting out the children's school needs, Richard called Margaret. Ms. Margaret, have the children gone back to school? They have. And for the first time in months, they left home excited to go to school. That's wonderful. How are they adjusting? Tommy said he's no longer embarrassed about his notebook. Emma's been participating more in class. And Lily made a new friend. Richard smiled as he listened to the updates. Ms. Margaret, may I make a proposal? What proposal? I'd like to keep helping with the school expenses. And maybe we could talk about other issues like food and transportation. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Richard, can I be honest? Of course. This week was the first time in 4 months I slept through the night without worrying if the kids would be able to go to school the next day. And is that good? It's wonderful, but it also scares me. Why does it scare you? Because I'm starting to rely on your help. What if you decide to stop? It was a fair concern, and Richard understood he needed to offer some kind of assurance. Ms. Margaret, how about we formalize our partnership? What do you mean? What if we set up a small fund for the children's education? Something that ensures continuity even if something happens to me. You'd do that? I would. But first, I'd like to learn more about the kids' other needs. Can I stop by this weekend to talk? Of course, but this time I'll prepare a snack. You've helped me so much. It's the least I can do. The following Saturday, Richard returned to Margaret's home. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. The kids ran to greet him at the door, clearly more comfortable with his presence. Mr. Richard, Tommy shouted, look at my new notebook. Tommy proudly showed off a notebook with a colorful cover, already filled with carefully done math exercises. How beautiful, Tommy. Are you enjoying math class? I like it now. The teacher said I've improved a lot. Emma, still shy, stepped forward timidly. Mr. Richard, I drew a picture for you. The drawing showed a big family, a woman who must have been Margaret, 4 children, Michael, and a man in a suit who was probably Richard himself. Everyone was smiling and holding hands. It's beautiful, Emma. May I take it home? Emma nodded, beaming with joy. Lily, the youngest, tugged at Richard's hand. Mr. Richard, come see my room. The girls' room was small, with 2 twin beds where the 3 sisters slept together. But it was tidy and clean, with children's drawings taped to the walls. I sleep here with Emma, Lily explained, and Tommy sleeps on the living room couch. Tommy sleeps on the couch? Yeah, but he doesn't complain. He said men have to take care of the women in the house. Richard's heart ached at the thought of a 10-year-old boy taking on such responsibility. When they returned to the living room, Margaret had prepared a simple snack, bread with butter, coffee, and fruit juice. Sorry, I don't have anything fancier, Margaret said. It's perfect, Ms. Margaret. Thank you. As they ate, Richard took the opportunity to learn more about the family's routine. How does a typical day go here? I leave at 5 in the morning. Ashley, my daughter, wakes up at 6 and helps the kids get ready for school. She takes them to the bus stop and comes back to get ready for her own school. And after school, the kids come home around 11:30. Ashley gets back from her school at 12:30 and stays with them until I get home at 9:30 at night. Does Ashley work in the afternoon? She does. She helps at a bakery nearby. It's just part-time, but every bit helps. And the kids' meals during the day? Margaret lowered her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. They eat at school. In the morning. In the afternoon. In the afternoon, sometimes I leave money to buy something. Sometimes Ashley improvises with what we have at home. And when there's nothing at home, then they just have the school lunch. Richard began to understand why the kids were always so hungry when Michael showed up with food. Often, their only decent meal of the day was the school lunch. Ms. Margaret, can I suggest something? Of course. What if we organize a system to make sure the kids have at least 2 solid meals a day, a hearty breakfast at home and lunch when they get back from school? How? I can help with the food costs, and maybe we can prepare some ready-made meals that Ashley just needs to heat up. Margaret hesitated. How much would that cost? Less than I spend on business lunches in a week. Are you sure? Absolutely. And it's not just about money, it's also about organization. I can help plan nutritious, budget-friendly menus. Tommy, who had been listening, walked up to Richard. Mr. Richard, if we eat better, will I grow taller? The innocent question brought an emotional silence to the conversation. Of course. Tommy, Good food helps you grow strong and healthy. Then I'm in, said Tommy, making everyone laugh. Margaret looked at the three kids, who were clearly excited about the possibility of better meals. All right, but I want to make it clear that this doesn't stop me from working and trying to improve our situation. Of course not, Ms. Margaret. In fact, I think this might even help you have more energy to focus on work, knowing the kids are well taken care of. In the following days, Richard dove headfirst into the logistics of family meals. He researched child nutrition, budget-friendly menus, and practical ways to organize meals. Michael remained his partner in this journey, offering insights into the reality of life with limited resources. Mr. Richard, there's something you need to understand, Michael said during one of their conversations. When you're poor, you can't buy in bulk. You buy what you need for today, maybe tomorrow at most. Why? Because if you spend money stocking up for the week and an emergency comes up tomorrow, you'll have no money to handle it. It's better to be sure of tonight's dinner than to risk not having money for tomorrow's medicine. Richard had never thought of it that way. In his life, he planned expenses months ahead, made long-term investments, bought in bulk to save. But for people like Margaret and Michael, financial planning was a matter of daily survival. So how can we help with that? Maybe by keeping some basic staples always available. Rice, beans, oil, things that don't spoil, and organizing weekly purchases of fresh items. Richard liked the idea. It was practical and respected Margaret's autonomy. When he proposed the system to Margaret, she agreed on one condition. I want to be part of the shopping. I don't want you choosing everything alone. Why? Because I know the kids' tastes. I know what they eat and what they leave on their plates, and I want them to learn to value food, knowing it was chosen carefully. Richard thought the condition was perfect. More than that, he realized Margaret was starting to see him not as a distant benefactor, but as a partner in raising the kids. Their first trip to the supermarket together was eye-opening for Richard. Margaret had an impressive knowledge of prices, quality, and how to make the most of every purchase. This rice is on sale, Margaret explained. It's the same quality as that one over there, but it's 20% cheaper. How do you know? Experience. When you need to make every penny count, you learn to compare everything. Richard observed how Margaret mentally calculated the cost of each item, always checking if it was within their agreed budget. It was a complex math she did naturally, without a calculator or notes. Ms. Margaret, have you ever thought about working in administration? Margaret laughed at the question. Administration? I barely finished high school, but you have a practical knowledge of financial management that many trained administrators don't. It's not knowledge, Mr. Richard. It's necessity. During the shopping, they ran into Michael, who was doing his own groceries. Michael, called the kids, who had insisted on coming along to the supermarket. Hi everyone, so good to see you here. Richard noticed Michael's cart was much emptier than theirs. How's your family, Michael? Good, thank God. My wife got some sewing work to do at home, so things have improved a bit. That's great. And your daughters? They're fine. The oldest is turning 9 next week. Tommy immediately perked up. Will there be a party? Michael hesitated. Just a little cake at home, you know. Nothing big. Richard sensed Michael was embarrassed. The celebration would likely be very simple due to finances. Michael, where do you live? I've never visited your place. Oh, it's nearby, Mr. Richard, but it's very modest. I'd love to meet your family. You've helped me so much with the kids. I'd like to return the favor somehow. Michael glanced at Margaret as if asking how to respond. Mr. Richard. Margaret stepped in. Michael is very proud too. He doesn't like accepting help. I understand, but it's not about help, it's about friendship. You've all become my friends. It was true. Over the past weeks, Richard had developed genuine affection for Michael, Margaret, and the kids. They had become more important to him than many people he'd known for years. Michael, can I make a suggestion? Said Richard. How about we organize a joint birthday party for your daughter and to celebrate the improvements at the kids' school? How do you mean? A party at Ms. Margaret's place, with both families together. I'll cover the costs, and you handle the details. The kids immediately lit up at the idea. Party! Party! Tommy and Lily started shouting, drawing curious looks from other shoppers. Michael and Margaret exchanged glances, clearly debating whether to accept. "It's a special occasion," Richard reasoned, "and parties are better with friends." "All right," Margaret finally said, "but nothing too fancy. A simple party, just the kids." "Perfect. When works for you?" "Next Saturday," Michael suggested. "Perfect. I'll bring soda and sweets. You take care of the cake and decorations." As they finished shopping, Richard noticed how the dynamic between them had shifted. It wasn't a rich man helping the poor anymore. It was a group of friends planning a party for the kids. In the week leading up to the party, Richard found himself more excited than he'd been in a long time. He researched children's parties, bought simple but cheerful decorations, and carefully picked sweets and sodas the kids would love. Jennifer noticed the change in her husband's behavior. "You've been different these past few weeks," she remarked during Thursday's dinner. "Different how?" "Lighter, happier. What project are you working on?" Richard decided it was time to tell Jennifer everything. "Actually, it's not a work project, it's something personal." He shared the whole story. Michael, the kids, Margaret, the help he'd been giving, and the party happening on Saturday. Jennifer listened silently, with an expression Richard couldn't decipher. "And why didn't you tell me any of this before?" she asked when he finished. Because I didn't know how you'd react." "How did you think I'd react?" "I don't know. Maybe you'd think it was a waste of time or that I was being naive." Jennifer stayed quiet for a moment. "Richard, in 15 years of marriage, I've never seen you so excited about anything that wasn't work. Is that good or bad?" "It's wonderful. I just wish I'd known this side of you sooner. Would you like to come to the party on Saturday? Meet these people who've become so important to me." Jennifer smiled. "I'd love to." On the day of the party, Richard and Jennifer arrived at Miss Margaret's house loaded with bags. Decorations, sodas, sweets, some simple toys Richard had bought on impulse. The house was full. Besides Miss Margaret's and Michael's families, some neighbors had shown up with their own children. The small backyard was decorated with colorful balloons and paper banners. "Mr. Richard," the children shouted when they saw him arrive. "And who's she?" "This is my wife, Jennifer. Jennifer, these are Tommy, Emma, and Lily." Jennifer crouched down to the children's level. "Hi, everyone. Richard's told me so much about you." "He said you're really pretty," Lily said with childlike honesty, making Jennifer blush and everyone laugh. Michael's daughter Charlotte was radiant in her simple party dress. She was a shy girl, resembling her father, but smiled constantly while playing with the other children. "Michael," Richard said when he found a moment to speak with him alone, "how are you feeling?" "Happy, Mr. Richard, very happy. It's been a long time since I've seen my family so joyful. And your wife, how is she handling things?" "At first she was suspicious, just like Miss Margaret. But now she says you're an angel." "I'm no angel, Michael. Just someone who needed to learn what really matters in life." During the party, Richard watched as the children played together, with no distinction of social class or family situation. They made games out of anything. Soda caps became game pieces. Twigs turned into magic wands. Jennifer was chatting animatedly with Ms. Margaret and Michael's wife, Sarah. Richard was surprised to see how quickly they connected, finding common interests despite socioeconomic differences. "Your wife is very kind," Ms. Margaret commented when she approached Richard. "She really liked you all too. Mr. Richard, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why didn't you two ever have children?" It was a question Richard usually avoided, but coming from Ms. Margaret, it didn't feel intrusive. "We tried for a few years, it didn't happen, and then we got used to it being just the two of us." "Did you ever think about adoption?" "We did, but we always made excuses. Work, travel, lack of time. Deep down, I think we were afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid we wouldn't know how to do it right. Afraid we wouldn't be good parents." Ms. Margaret looked over to where Jennifer was playing Ring Around the Rosie with the children. "From what I can see, you'd do just fine." The party lasted all afternoon. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, Charlotte asked everyone to make a wish with her. "I'm going to wish for everyone here to always be happy," she said, before blowing Out the candles. The girl's simple, pure wish moved all the adults present. As the party was winding down and families began saying goodbye, Tommy approached Richard. "Mr. Richard, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Tommy." "Will you be our godfather?" The question caught Richard completely off guard. "What do you mean, Tommy?" "At school, my friends talk about their godparents, people who help take care of the kids along with their parents. You take care of us, so could you be our godfather?" Richard looked at Margaret, who was watching the conversation with a touched smile. "If Aunt Margaret agrees, I'd love to be your godfather." "I agree," said Margaret. "You deserve to have a godfather who truly cares." That night on their way home, Jennifer and Richard talked about the celebration. "What a special day," Jennifer said. "Did you enjoy meeting them?" "I loved it, and I understand why you fell in love with this situation." "Why do you think I fell in love with it?" "Because for the first time in years, I saw you acting from the heart instead of just your head." "And you approve?" "Completely. In fact, I have a proposal." "What proposal?" "What if we got more involved? Not just you, but both of us together." Richard felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Having Jennifer as his partner in this journey would be perfect. "What do you have in mind?" "We could take turns visiting, help with more practical things, and maybe we could start thinking about long-term plans." "Like what?" "Higher education for the kids when they grow up, vocational training, things that really change their future." Richard smiled. Jennifer was thinking exactly like him. "We'll have to talk to Margaret about this, see if she's open to more involvement." "Of course, but I think she trusts you now." In the weeks that followed, Richard's routine changed completely. He started visiting Margaret's family at least twice a week, always bringing Jennifer along. They established an interesting dynamic. Richard handled the more practical and financial matters, while Jennifer focused on the children's emotional and educational support. Jennifer discovered she had a knack for helping with homework. She began visiting the kids twice a week, specifically for tutoring. "Emma is really smart," Jennifer told Richard. "She just needs a little more confidence." "What about Tommy?" "Tommy's a natural leader. He looks after his sisters, organizes games, resolves conflicts, but he's taking on too much responsibility for his age." "What do you suggest?" "That we give him more opportunities to just be a kid. Playtime, fun, no responsibilities." Richard started taking Tommy on small weekend outings, movies, parks, places where he could just be a 10-year-old. "Mr. Richard," Tommy said during one of these outings, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "Sometimes I dream that my mom comes back and sees how well we're doing now. I think she'd be happy." The purity and emotional maturity of Tommy always amazed Richard. "I'm sure she'd be very proud of you, Tommy. You're a very special boy." "Do you think I'll be able to take good care of my sisters when I grow up?" "Tommy, you don't have to carry that responsibility alone. There are lots of people who want to help you." "I know, but I'm the man of the family now." Richard realized he needed to address this with Tommy. The boy was taking on a burden that shouldn't be his. "Tommy, how about we make a deal?" "What deal?" "You keep being a caring, protective big brother, but let the adults handle the adult responsibilities. Deal?" Tommy thought for a moment. "Deal. But if you ever need me, I'll be here." The wisdom and loyalty in Tommy's words moved Richard deeply. Meanwhile, Lily was thriving with the extra attention. Her nightmares had decreased dramatically, and she was becoming a more confident, sociable child. "Aunt Jennifer," said Lily during one of their homework sessions, "can you be my second mom?" Jennifer had to compose herself to keep from crying at the question. "I would love to be your second mom, Lily, but you already have a mother in your heart who will always be with you." "I know, but now I have two moms, one in heaven and one here." The simplicity with which Lily processed the changes in her life showed how adaptable children can be when they receive proper love and care. Emma, the shyest one, was slowly coming out of her shell. She had discovered she loved drawing and was constantly creating little works of art. "Look, Uncle Richard," she said one day, showing him a drawing. "I drew our big family." The drawing showed a large house with room for everyone. Margaret, the three children, Michael and his family, Richard and Jennifer. Everyone was smiling, and hearts were scattered across the page. "It's beautiful, Emma. You're very talented. Aunt Jennifer said I can take drawing lessons when I'm older." Richard and Jennifer had truly begun thinking about the children's educational future. They researched art schools for Emma, youth leadership programs for Tommy, and activities to help Lily build her confidence. But all these plans depended on an important conversation they still needed to have with Margaret. One evening after dinner at Margaret's house, which had become a weekly routine, Richard decided to bring it up. "Ms. Margaret, Jennifer and I would like to talk about some plans for the children's future." Margaret, who was washing dishes, stopped and turned to them. "What kind of plans?" "Long-term educational plans, extra classes, maybe a better private school, preparation for high school and college." Margaret dried her hands on the dish towel and sat at the table with them. "That would cost a lot of money." "It's not about money, Ms. Margaret. It's about opportunity. And you'd do this for them." "We would, but only if you're completely comfortable with it." Margaret was silent for a few minutes, clearly processing the offer. "Mr. Richard, Ms. Jennifer, you know the children already see you as family, right?" "We know, and we see them as family too." "Then why don't we make it official?" "How do you mean? Would you like to be their real godparents, officially?" The suggestion took Richard and Jennifer by surprise, but it was exactly what they had secretly hoped for. "We'd be honored, Ms. Margaret, but what would that mean in practice?" "It would mean you'd have legal rights and responsibilities for them. If anything ever happens to me, you could make decisions about their education and well-being. And you'd be comfortable with that?" "I would. You've proven you truly love these children, and they need security for their future." Jennifer held Margaret's hand. "It would be a privilege for us, Margaret." "Then let's make it official, but there's one condition." "What?" "As long as I'm alive and well, I remain their primary guardian. You're the godparents, but I'm their caretaker. Of course, we don't want to take your place in any way. And there's one more thing." "What?" "If you ever grow tired of this responsibility, talk to me before just disappearing. These children have already lost important people. They can't go through that again." Margaret's concern was understandable and fair. "Margaret," Richard said seriously, "that will never happen. These children are in our hearts to stay. And if you have children of your own." "These children are already our children in spirit," Jennifer replied. "If we have others in the future, they'll grow up knowing they have older siblings we love dearly." 2 weeks later, they formalized the godparent arrangement at the courthouse. Tommy, Emma, and Lily now officially had godparents who could make important decisions about their future. On the day the papers were signed, the children were more excited than nervous. "Are we a real family now?" Lily asked. "We've always been a real family," Richard replied. "Now we just have some papers that confirm it." But the challenges were far from over. In fact, formalizing the godparent arrangement brought up issues they hadn't anticipated. The first issue arose at school. The teachers began asking questions about the children's family situation, especially when Jennifer showed up to pick one of them up or attend school meetings. "Are you Tommy's mother?" the teacher asked during a meeting. "I'm his godmother," Jennifer explained. "His Aunt Margaret is the legal guardian, but my husband and I are the official godparents." "And how does that work in practice?" "We're actively involved in their upbringing. We help with important decisions and provide emotional and financial support." The teacher took several notes, clearly trying to understand the unconventional family dynamic. But the biggest challenge came from an unexpected source: Richard's family. His parents, who lived in another state, came to visit a few weeks after the godparent arrangement was formalized. When Richard told them about the children, their reaction wasn't what he'd hoped for. "Richard," his father said, "are you sure about what you're doing?" "What do you mean, Dad?" "Getting so involved with a family that isn't yours, it could lead to complications." "What kind of complications?" "Legal, financial, emotional. What if they start taking advantage of your kindness?" "Dad, they're not just them. It's Margaret, Michael, and 3 wonderful kids who've become our family. But you've only known these people for a few months. How can you be sure they're trustworthy?" Richard felt his irritation grow at his father's skepticism. "Dad, These people have taught me more about what really matters in life than anything else in the past few years. Son, I'm not questioning their good intentions, but you're mixing feelings with business. It's not business, Dad, it's life. The conversation grew tense, and Richard realized his own parents couldn't fully understand his transformation. His mother tried to mediate. Richard, your father is just worried about you. Maybe you could introduce us to these people. Of course, Mom, I'd actually love for you to meet them, but in a neutral setting, his father insisted. Not at their home. Richard sensed his parents' reluctance to fully accept the situation, but decided to give them a chance to meet Margaret and the children. He arranged a lunch at a simple but nice restaurant, inviting Margaret, the three kids, Michael and his family, and his parents. The gathering started off well. The children, always charming, quickly won over Richard's mother. Are you Godfather Richard's grandma? Lily asked curiously. Yes, I am, sweetheart. Then you're our grandma too. Lily's simple logic drew smiles from everyone, including Richard's father, who was trying to remain reserved. Over lunch, Margaret and Michael talked naturally with Richard's parents, sharing about their lives, their struggles, and how Richard's help had been so important. Ms. Margaret, Richard's mother asked, how many children do you have? Officially, for my daughter Ashley and my sister's 3 kids, but in my heart I now have 6. Richard and Jennifer have become my children too. The answer moved Richard's mother, who began to understand the situation better, but it was Tommy who truly won over the most resistant grandfather. Sir, Tommy said to Richard's father, do you know your son is the best godfather in the world? Is that so? Why? Because he doesn't just help us with money, he helps with kindness, and Aunt Jennifer teaches us how to do our homework, and they come to our birthday parties, and my godfather Richard takes me to the movies. Richard's, father looked at his son with a new expression. Richard, you take him to the movies? Yes, I took him to see the Spider-Man movie last week. And did you like the movie, Tommy? I did, but I liked going with my godfather even more. He bought giant popcorn and soda. The interaction between Tommy and his grandfather continued throughout lunch. By the end, the boy had completely disarmed the older man's resistance. Richard, his father said after lunch, you have a beautiful family. Thank you, Dad. And I apologize for my doubts. Now I understand why you fell in love with this situation. But challenges kept coming from other directions. The children's school began pressing for a clearer definition of their family situation. We need to know who can make decisions about the children, the principal explained to Ms. Margaret and Richard during a meeting. If a child gets hurt, who do we authorize to pick them up? If there's a disciplinary issue, who do we call? It was a valid concern, and they needed to establish clear protocols. Ms. Margaret remained the primary guardian, but Richard and Jennifer were added as emergency contacts and authorized to make decisions in her absence. Another issue arose when Tommy started talking at school about his rich godfather. Mr. Anderson, Tommy's teacher said in a private conversation, Tommy has been telling his classmates that his godfather is very wealthy and can buy him anything. Is that causing problems? Some classmates are getting jealous, and some parents are asking questions. What kind of questions? They want to know if you can help other families too, and some are questioning whether Tommy is being given special treatment compared to other students. Richard realized he needed to talk to Tommy about how to discuss their family situation at school. Tommy, he said during one of their private talks, have you been telling your school friends about our family? Yes. Why? Did I do something wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. But maybe we can talk about the best way to explain our situation. What do you mean? Well, our family is special because it formed differently than most families. But what makes us special isn't money. It's love. Oh, I get it. Like Michael. He always said what mattered wasn't the money he spent on food for us, but the care. Exactly. So when you talk about our family at school, how about focusing on the care instead of the money? Can I say you're the best godparents in the world because you take care of us with love? Perfect, Tommy. But perhaps the biggest challenge came from an entirely unexpected source, the success of the situation itself. After a few months of formalized godparenting, The 3 children were clearly thriving. Their grades improved dramatically. They were more confident, more sociable, happier. The progress was so noticeable that it caught the attention of others in the community. "Mr. Anderson," one of Miss Margaret's neighbors said one day, "wouldn't you like to help other children too?" "How do you mean?" "There are several families in this neighborhood going through similar struggles, kids who can't go to school properly, who go hungry." It was a delicate situation. Richard wanted to help, but also knew he couldn't become the rich godfather to every needy child in the area. "It's complicated," he explained to Jennifer. "If I start helping other families, I might create expectations I can't meet. But if I don't help, I might seem heartless. What if we tried a different approach?" "What do you mean?" "What if we organized ways for the community to help itself? Instead of you being the sole provider, you could be a catalyst for people to organize." Jennifer's idea was interesting. Rather than creating dependence on her individual help, they could assist the community in developing its own support network. How would we do that? "We can start small, maybe by organizing a mother's group to share childcare, or creating a system for neighbors to exchange favors." Richard liked the proposal. It was more sustainable and respected the community's autonomy. They discussed the idea with Ms. Margaret. "I think it's interesting," said Ms. Margaret. "Here in the neighborhood, people have always helped each other when they can. The problem is everyone is so overwhelmed that sometimes there's no energy left to organize things. What if we helped organize it? How? We could facilitate meetings, offer a space for gatherings, help with basic organizational costs. Where would this space be? How about here at your house, in the backyard? We could improve the infrastructure a bit to make it more comfortable for meetings." Ms. Margaret grew thoughtful. "It would be a way to give back the help I received, right? By helping other families." "Exactly. And the children could also participate, learning about community and solidarity." The idea quickly evolved. Ms. Margaret agreed to have her backyard renovated to serve as a community space. Richard funded the construction of a small awning, some chairs and a large table. The first meeting of the community support group took place on a Saturday afternoon. 12 families showed up, all facing challenges similar to those Ms. Margaret had once faced. "Let's introduce ourselves," said Ms. Margaret, naturally taking on the role of facilitator. "Each family can share a bit about their situation and see how we can help one another." The stories that emerged were touching and familiar. Parents working too much, children needing more attention, struggles to balance work and family care. But creative solutions also arose. "I work mornings and Miss Susan works afternoons," said one mother. "We could take turns watching each other's kids while the other is working." "Thus, I know how to sew," offered another. "I can help mend school uniforms if someone helps me with other things." "My husband is an electrician," a third added. "He can help with small repairs in exchange for other favors." Richard watched, in admiration. The community truly had the resources to help itself. It just needed a little organization and facilitation. "How about we create an exchange notebook?" Jennifer suggested. "Each family writes down what they can offer and what they need. Then we can arrange trades." The idea was an instant success. In the following weeks, Ms. Margaret's backyard became an informal community hub. The weekly meetings turned into social gatherings where families got to know each other better and organized mutual support. The children benefited too. They had more friends, more caregivers, and were learning about cooperation and community. "Godfather Richard," Emma said one day, "now I have lots of aunts and uncles, not just you." "So that's true. How do you feel about that?" "I feel safe. If something happens, there are so many people who will take care of us." The sense of collective security was exactly what Richard had hoped for, but with success came growing responsibility. The community group began turning to Richard for more complex issues. "Mr. Richard," said Ms. Susan, one of the group members, "my son is in high school and wants to go to college, but we can't afford it. And you'd like me to pay for his tuition?" "Not exactly. But wouldn't you know how to get a scholarship?" Richard realized his role was evolving from wealthy benefactor to community advisor. People weren't just seeking financial help, but guidance on accessing resources and opportunities. "I can look into scholarships," Richard promised. And maybe we could organize a meeting about educational opportunities for the young people in the community. The demand for information and guidance was growing, and Richard realized he needed to get better organized to meet these needs without overextending himself. "Jennifer," he said one evening, "I think we need to professionalize our community. Support a bit. How so?" "Hire someone who understands social programs, scholarships, educational opportunities. Someone who can guide families in a more specialized way." "A social worker?" "Something like that. Someone who can bridge the gap between the community and available opportunities." They found Jessica, a recently graduated social worker looking for a chance to work with underserved communities. Richard hired her to hold weekly sessions in Ms. Margaret's backyard, offering free guidance to families. "My role isn't to solve people's problems," Jessica explained during her first meeting with the group. "My role is to teach you how to find the solutions that already exist." Jessica's arrival brought a new dynamic to the community group. People began to better understand their rights, access government programs, and organize documentation for various needs. But it also brought an unexpected challenge for Richard. Jessica started questioning some aspects of his approach. "Mr. Anderson," she said during a private conversation, "can I make an observation?" "Of course. You're creating a situation of emotional dependency." "How so?" "The people in the community are starting to see you as the solution to every problem. That's not healthy." "But I don't solve every problem, I just facilitate." "Yes, but in their eyes you're indispensable. What if one day you need to step back?" It was a valid concern, and Richard realized Jessica was right. "What do you suggest?" "That we work toward making the community truly self-sufficient, that they learn to organize themselves without depending on your presence or resources." "How do we do that?" "By transferring responsibilities. Instead of you funding everything, how about teaching them how to secure their own resources? Instead of you deciding priorities, how about letting them choose democratically?" Jessica's proposal made sense, but it also unsettled Richard. He had grown accustomed to being central to problem solving. What if they can't organize themselves? Then they're not truly ready for independence, but I believe they are. "And what would my role be?" "A supporter when needed, not a constant provider. Someone they can turn to in special situations, but don't rely on for everyday matters." Implementing this change was harder than Richard expected. Both he and the community had grown used to the dynamic of dependency. "Mr. Anderson," Ms. Margaret said during a frank conversation, "I understand what Jessica is saying, but I'm also afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you'll pull away completely. Afraid that this is just a polite way for you to wash your hands of responsibility." Ms. Margaret's concern was legitimate and needed addressing. "Margaret, let me be very clear. We will never walk away completely. You're our family. But we want to make sure you don't depend on us for everything." "How can we be sure?" "We'll make the transition gradually. And let's clearly establish what kind of support will always be available and what kind of responsibility should be yours." They developed a 6-month transition plan. During this period, they gradually transferred responsibilities to the community itself. In the first month, the community took over organizing the weekly meetings. In the second month, they created a community fund where each family contributed what they could to help in emergencies. In the third month, they organized a rotation system for collective childcare. In the fourth month, they established partnerships with local businesses to secure discounts and flexible payment options. In the fifth month, they formed an advocacy group to push for neighborhood infrastructure improvements. In the sixth month, they implemented rotating local leadership, where different families took turns coordinating activities for set periods. Throughout this process, Richard continued offering financial support when needed, but always within predefined limits and with collective approval from the community. "How do you feel about these changes?" he asked the children after 3 months of transition. "I like it because now I have even more friends," said Lily, "and everyone looks out for everyone else." "I like it because I learned we can solve problems together," said Emma. "I like it because now I'm not just the big brother in my family, I'm the big brother for several families," said Tommy. The children's perspective showed the transition was positive for them too. But it was during the 5th month that the real test of their new structure came. Margaret fell ill. It wasn't serious, but she needed to rest for 2 weeks. In the past, this would have caused an immediate crisis. Who would care for the children? How would they get to school? Who would prepare meals? But the community network they'd built kicked in automatically. Ms. Susan took over morning childcare. Mr. Robert handled school drop-offs and pickups. Michael's wife organized meals. Jessica made extra visits to ensure everything ran smoothly. Richard and Jennifer kept up their regular visits, but didn't need to take on extra responsibilities. The community was caring for itself. "How do you feel about this?" Jennifer asked Richard as they watched the community function without them at the center. "Proud," he replied, "and a little nostalgic." "Nostalgic? I miss being indispensable, but I know this is better for everyone. You're not less important now, your importance is just different." "How so?" "Before, you were important because you solved problems. Now you're important because you helped create something bigger than yourself." When Margaret recovered, she made sure to organize a special thank you gathering. "I want to thank the whole community," she said to the group. "You've proven we've truly become one big family. And I especially want to thank Richard and Jennifer," she continued, "not just for the help they gave, but for the wisdom of teaching us to stand on our own feet." Margaret's words moved Richard deeply. It was acknowledgement that his help had gone beyond simple charity and become true empowerment. "Mr. Richard," Jessica said after the meeting, "do you want to know the greatest success of this whole process?" "What?" "You managed to make yourself unnecessary, and that's the best proof your work was done well. In the following months, the dynamic stabilized into a system that worked for everyone." The community had developed autonomy to handle everyday matters, but Richard and Jennifer remained an integral part of the extended family. They maintained their regular presence in the children's lives, but now as loving godparents, not as indispensable saviors. "Godfather Richard," said Tommy during one of their regular outings, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "At first, when you started helping us, I was scared you'd leave. And now I know you'll never leave because you're our real family. But I also know that if you need to travel or be away for a while, we'll be okay." "How does that make you feel?" "Safe. It's good to know we have you, but it's also good to know we can take care of ourselves." Tommy's emotional maturity, now at 12 years old, constantly impressed Richard. At the end of that year, they organized a birthday party, celebrating 2 years of the big family, as the children had begun calling the whole group. The party brought together all the families from the community, Michael and his family, Richard's parents, who now visited regularly, and even some of Richard's former co-workers who had become curious about his social project. "It's not a social project," Richard explained to one of them. "It's my life." During the party, Michael approached Richard for a private conversation. "Mr. Richard, I wanted to thank you for something." "What?" "You taught me that helping others isn't about having money, it's about having heart." "How so?" "I always thought I couldn't help anyone because I was poor, but watching you I learned that all of us can help in some way." "And are you helping?" "Yes. Now I make free deliveries for elderly people in the community who can't leave their homes, and I teach other delivery workers to do the same." "That's wonderful, Michael. And you know what's best? My family is happier now than when we only received help." "Why?" "Because now we also give, and giving feels just as good as receiving." Michael's wisdom perfectly captured the transformation that had taken place in the entire community. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. During that party, Richard had time to reflect on everything that had happened over the past 2 years. His life had completely changed, but not just because of what he had given, mostly because of what he had received. "Jennifer," he said as they watched the children playing together, "do you regret anything?" "What would I regret?" "Getting us so involved in this situation, changing our routine, our plans so much." "Richard, before this, our life was comfortable but empty. Now it's full of purpose, even with all the complications. Especially because of the complications, real problems make us grow as people. And our marriage, How do you think this experience has affected us? It brought us closer. For the first time in years, we have a shared project that goes beyond work or personal comfort. It was true. Their involvement with the community had given Richard and Jennifer's relationship a new dimension. But perhaps the biggest transformation had happened within Richard himself. "You know what the biggest change in me has been?" he said to Jennifer. "What?" "Before I measured success only by numbers, profit, assets, company growth. Now I measure it by lives changed, by genuine smiles, by problems solved together." "And are you happier now?" "Much happier. Because now I understand what purpose means." At the start of their third year of involvement with the community, an unexpected opportunity arose. A local journalist had heard about the community work in the Hope Garden neighborhood and wanted to write a story about successful social initiatives. "Mr. Richard," the journalist said during an interview, "what's the secret to this project's success? First, it's not a project, it's a family. Second, the success isn't mine. It belongs to the community, which learned to organize and care for itself." "But you were the catalyst." "Maybe. But a catalyst isn't the main character. The community has always been the protagonist. Do you have plans to expand this initiative to other neighborhoods?" "No. This community is unique with its own characteristics and needs. Every community must find its own solutions." "But wouldn't you want to replicate the model?" "The model can't be replicated because it's not a model. It's a set of authentic human relationships that developed organically. What advice would you give other business owners who want to get involved socially?" "Start small, be patient, listen more than you speak, and be prepared to be transformed by the process." The article was published and brought some visibility to the community's work. It led to a few one-time donations and offers of help, but it also created a problem: social tourism. People started showing up in the neighborhood wanting to see the social project as if it were a tourist attraction. "Is this bothering you?" Richard asked Miss Margaret. "A little. We're not a zoo for people to come and observe." "How would you like to handle it? What if we organized a way for people to learn about our work without invading our privacy?" The community decided to create a monthly open house where they would welcome visitors interested in learning about their work. But they set clear rules. Visits would be scheduled, organized, and always focused on education, not tourism. "We want people to learn from our experience," Ms. Margaret explained to visitors during the first open house. "But we also want them to understand we're not a model to be copied. We're a specific community that found our own solutions." The open house became a success, attracting other community groups, college students, social workers, and even politicians interested in understanding successful social initiatives. But the most interesting part was what happened with the children during these visits. They became little ambassadors for the community, explaining to visitors how their lives had changed. "Before I was ashamed of where I lived," Emma told a group of students. "Now I'm proud, because here everyone looks out for each other." "I used to think only rich people could help others," Tommy said. "Now I know anyone can help if they want to. Even kids can help." "I used to be afraid of a lot of things," Lily said. "Now I'm only scared of spiders." The children's words always brought laughter and emotion from the visitors. During one of these visits, Nancy, a young businesswoman looking for ways to get socially involved, showed up. "Mr. Richard," she said after the presentation, "I'd love to replicate this in my area." "Nancy, as I told the journalist, this can't be replicated, but you can be inspired to create something new." "How would I start?" "The same way I did, by paying attention to the people around you, seeing real needs, getting to know real people, building authentic relationships." "Would you give me some practical tips?" "Of course, but first tell me, do you have children?" "No." "Husband? Boyfriend?" "I have a fiancé." "Does he support your interest in social involvement?" "Actually, it was his idea. He said he wants our family to be useful to society." Richard liked the answer. Nancy seemed to have motivations similar to those he had once had. "Nancy, can I give you some advice?" "Of course. Don't start by trying to change the world. Start by getting to know one person, one family, one specific situation." And then? Then you'll naturally discover how you can help. But always remember that real help means creating independence, not dependence. Can I stay in touch with you all to ask for advice when I need it? You can. But remember, every situation is unique. What worked here might not work in your area. Nancy became a regular visitor to the community, always learning and always respectful. A few months later, she returned with news. Mr. Richard, I've started helping a family near my home. How's it going? Hard, but rewarding. I'm beginning to understand what you meant about building genuine relationships. What kind of challenges are you facing? The same distrust you faced. The family doesn't believe I want to help without expecting anything in return. And how are you handling that? With patience. And by proving it through actions, not words. Perfect, that's the only way. Nancy's progress reminded Richard of his own journey. The challenges were similar, but each situation had its own nuances. Meanwhile, in the original community, the children were growing up and facing new challenges. Tommy, now 13, was starting to think about high school and his future career. Godfather Richard, he said during one of their talks, I want a career that lets me help other people. What kind of career? I'm not sure yet. Maybe social work, maybe teaching, maybe non-profit management. Why those fields? Because I've learned that the most important work is the kind that helps others grow. That's a very mature outlook, Tommy. I learned from your example. Emma at 11 was developing her artistic talent more and more. Godmother Jennifer, she said, I want to take more advanced art classes. What kind of art? Drawing, painting, maybe sculpture. I want to learn how to create beautiful things that make people happy. Like the art you already make that makes us happy. Yes, but I want to make even better art. Art that can be sold and help my family financially too. Emma's ambition was touching and practical at the same time. Lily, at 9, was becoming an extremely sociable and empathetic child. Godfather Richard, she said, I want to be like Aunt Margaret when I grow up. How so? I want to take care of children who need help. I want my home to always have room for one more person. That's a beautiful wish, Lily. It's because I've learned that family isn't just who you're born with. Family is who chooses to stay together. The children's wisdom always surprised Richard. They had grown up in an environment where solidarity was natural, and it was shaping their values deeply. Over time, Richard noticed his company was also being transformed by the community experience. He began implementing more humanized practices at work, flexible schedules for employees with young children, an on-site daycare, continuing education. Programs. Mr. Richard, said Susan, his secretary of 10 years, you've changed a lot as a boss. How so? Before, you only cared about results. Now you care about the people who deliver those results. And is that good or bad? It's wonderful. The work environment has improved so much, and oddly enough, the results have gotten better too. It was true. The company was having its best performance in years, and Richard believed it was tied to the greater humanization of workplace relationships. He also began hiring people from the very community where he worked socially. Ashley, Ms. Margaret's teenage daughter, landed an internship at the company. Michael was hired to coordinate internal deliveries. Mr. Richard, Michael said tonight's working here is so different from being a delivery driver for an app. Why? Here I feel valued as a person, not just as a work tool. How was it before? Before I was just a number. If I got sick, I was easily replaced. Here you care about me as a human being. Do you think that changes anything about your work? It changes everything. When you feel valued, you want to give your best. Michael's experience confirmed Richard's observations about the connection between humanization and productivity. 5 years after Richard and Michael first met, they organized a big celebration. The community had developed impressively. Several families had moved out of extreme poverty. Children who once didn't attend school regularly were now in high school with good grades. The mutual support system had solidified. Mr. Richard, Ms. Margaret said during a speech at the party, when you came into our lives, we thought you'd change our financial situation. But what really changed was how we see the world. How so? Before we lived with a scarcity mindset. Every family for itself, everyone saving what they could. Now we live with an abundance mindset. We know we're stronger together. And what's the practical difference? The difference is we're no longer afraid of the future. We know we'll face challenges, but we know we won't face them alone. During the celebration, Tommy, now 15 and in his second year of high school, made a special announcement. "Everyone, I have news to share." "What news?" they all asked. "I got accepted into a public university for business administration." The party paused for a moment before erupting in cheers. Tommy would be the first in his family to attend college. "How did you do it?" someone asked. "By studying hard, but mostly by applying everything I learned here about organization, teamwork, and persistence." "And what will you do after graduation?" "I'll come back here and help our community grow even more, maybe by creating cooperatives, organizing microloans, or developing new social projects." Tommy's determination to return and help his community moved everyone. Emma, now 13, also had news. "I won a scholarship to study art at a specialized school." "How did you manage that?" "My godmother Jennifer helped me prepare a portfolio of my drawings, and when I went for the interview, I told them our community's story. They were impressed not just by my talent, but by my life story." Lily, 11, had become a young community leader. "I organized a group of kids to help the elderly in the neighborhood," she announced. "We'll shop for those who can't leave home, read the newspaper for those with poor eyesight, and keep company with those who are lonely." Lily's initiative showed how community values were naturally passing to the next generation. During the party, Richard had an important conversation with Michael. "Michael, 5 years ago when we met, did you ever imagine you'd get this far?" "Never. I just wanted to feed those 3 kids. And now? Now I work at a company where I'm respected. My wife has a growing sewing business. My daughters are doing well in school. And I've learned I'm capable of so much more than I ever thought." What do you think was most important in this transformation? Believing I was capable of more than I thought, and having people who believed in me. Do you feel different as a person? Completely different. Before I felt small, insignificant. Now I know I can make a difference in other people's lives. And how do your children see this change? They're proud of their dad. Before I'd come home tired and defeated. Now I come home tired, but fulfilled. Michael's transformation was a reflection of the entire community's transformation. During the celebration, a special surprise appeared. Richard's parents had come from another state just for the occasion. "Dad," Richard said, "what do you think of how far this has come?" "Son, I have to admit I was wrong when I doubted what you were doing." "Why?" "Because I thought you were throwing money away. But now I see you were investing in something far more valuable than money." "What?" "Human dignity, real social transformation, sustainable community development. Have you changed your mind about social work?" "I have, especially when I realized this isn't charity, it's human development." His father's approval meant a lot to Richard, especially because it had been earned through concrete results, not just good intentions. His mother also had important observations. "Richard," she said, "do you know the most beautiful change I've seen in you?" "What?" "You've learned to be truly happy. Before, you were successful, but you weren't happy. Now you're both." "What makes you say that?" "The light in your eyes when you talk about these people, the energy you have when you're here, the way you and Jennifer look at each other when you're working together in this community." It was true. Richard had found a happiness he didn't know he was searching for. That night, after everyone had left and the celebration ended, Richard and Jennifer walked through the neighborhood streets. "Jennifer," he said, "do you have any regrets about this journey we've taken?" "None. And you?" "None either. In fact, I'm grateful." "Grateful for what?" "For finding people who taught me what really matters in life." "And what really matters?" "Authentic relationships, genuine purpose, the chance to make a difference in other people's lives." "Do you think our life is complete now?" "No, I think our life is just beginning. It took us 5 years to learn how to truly live." "And what are your plans for the future?" "To keep learning, to keep growing alongside this community, and maybe expand our impact but always in an organic and respectful way. How do you imagine our life 10 years from now? I don't know, but I know it'll be a life full of purpose and meaning. They stopped in front of Miss Margaret's house where it had all begun. The house now had a small sign at the entrance, Hope Community Center, a name chosen by the community itself. Richard, Jennifer said, when you first saw Michael feeding the children, did you imagine it would come this far? Never. I just felt I needed to understand what was happening better. And what did you discover? That something very simple and very powerful was happening. One human being caring for others without expecting anything in return. And did that inspire you to do the same? No. It inspired me to learn how to do the same. What's the difference? Doing the same would just be repeating actions. Learning how to do the same was understanding the values behind those actions. And what are those values? Genuine compassion, long-term commitment, respect for people's dignity, patience to build authentic relationships. Do you think other people can learn these values too? I'm sure of it, but everyone needs to find their own way to express them. They walked a little further in silence, soaking in the neighborhood's nighttime calm. Richard, Jennifer finally said, what was the biggest lesson you learned through all of this? Richard thought for a moment before answering. I learned that true happiness doesn't come from what you gain for yourself. It comes from what you build together with others. And what surprised you the most? Discovering that I needed them more than they needed me. How so? They taught me how to live with purpose. They showed me values I'd lost. They gave me a family I didn't know I was missing. Do you think they know that? I believe they do. And I think that's why our relationship works so well. Because we all know we're gaining something precious. When they got home that night, Richard felt more grateful than ever. Not just for the life he had, but for the life he'd discovered was possible. The next day, he found a letter Tommy had left for him. Godfather Richard, I wanted to write to you because today was a very special day. Seeing our whole family together made me think about everything that's happened these past few years. When my mom passed, I thought our lives were over. I was just a kid, but I felt like I had to take care of my sisters and didn't know how. Then Uncle Michael showed up with food. And then you came wanting to understand our situation. Back then I didn't get why a wealthy man would care about us. Now I understand. You weren't just saving us, you were saving yourself too, because you learned that a good life isn't a rich life. A good life is a shared life. I want you to know you changed our lives, but I also want you to know we changed yours too. Today, when I look at our community, I see something rare. People who truly care about each other. When I grow up and start my own family, I want to raise my kids with the same values I learned here. Thank you for stopping to look when you saw Uncle Michael feeding us. Thank you for choosing curiosity over indifference. Thank you for staying when you could have walked away. But most of all, thank you for teaching us that family is who chooses to love, not just who you're born with. With love and gratitude, Tommy. When Richard finished reading, tears filled his eyes. In just a few words, Tommy had captured the heart of the journey they'd shared. He tucked the letter away carefully, a lasting reminder that small acts of kindness could grow into something deep and enduring. That afternoon, Richard returned to where it all began, the underpass where the 3 children used to sit. Now, instead of hungry kids, there was a small community garden. The neighborhood families had come together to turn the space into a green area where children could play safely. A simple sign read, Hope Garden, cultivated with love by the community. Richard sat on one of the benches and watched the children playing. Some were kids from families he knew, others were new, drawn to the neighborhood by its reputation as a caring place. Mr. Richard, a familiar voice called. It was Lily, now 11, running toward him with 2 friends. Hi, Lily. How are you? Great. Look, these are my friends Katie and Megan. They're new to the neighborhood. Nice to meet you, girls. Mr. Richard, said Katie, a shy girl of about 10. Lily told me you're her family's godfather. I am, he replied. What's it like being a godfather? Richard smiled at the innocent question. It's a very rewarding responsibility. You have to care for, protect, and teach, but you also learn a lot. Learn what? You learn about love, about family, about how people can help each other. Would you like to have a godfather like that? Lily asked her friend. I would. My family's going through some tough times. What kind of tough times? Lily asked, with the ease of someone raised in an environment where talking about problems was normal. My dad lost his job last month. My mum's looking for work. And sometimes my brother and I can't go to school because there's no money for transportation. Richard listened carefully. It was a familiar situation, similar to what Tommy, Emma, and Lily had faced years ago. Katie, Lily said with the wisdom of her experiences, do you know our neighborhood community? No, we just moved here. Then you need to see it. Here, everyone helps everyone. We have meetings every week to figure out how to solve problems together. Really? Really? And there's Ms. Margaret who looks after all the kids. And there's Jessica who helps families find jobs and other things. And there's the community center where there's always something going on. Do you think you could help my family? Of course, Lily said without hesitation. That's what community is for. Richard watched the conversation with admiration. Lily, at 11, was naturally doing the work of community integration that he had learned over years. Katie, Richard said, if you'd like, I can introduce you to some people in the community, but always with your parents' permission, of course. They'd like that. They're kind of lost here. Then how about you ask them if they'd like to come to the next community meeting? It's tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon at Miss Margaret's house. I'll ask. When the girls went off to play, Richard thought about how the cycle was repeating itself. A new family arriving in the neighborhood in a vulnerable situation, being welcomed by the community that had formed years ago. But this time he wouldn't be the main character in the story. The community itself would take responsibility for integrating and supporting the new family. This was exactly what he had hoped for when he started the whole process, creating a sustainable structure that could function without him. The next day, during the community meeting, Katie arrived with her parents, Nancy and Anthony. Welcome, said Margaret, who remained one of the community's main facilitators. We'd like to get to know you and see how we can help each other. Nancy and Anthony shared their story. He had worked at a factory for 10 years before being laid off due to cutbacks. She was a housekeeper but was looking for steady work. They had 2 children, Katie and Kevin, who was 8. What kind of work are you looking for? Asked one of the community mothers. I'll take any honest job, Anthony said. I have experience with maintenance, cleaning, stock keeping. And I can work as a housekeeper, cook, or caregiver for the elderly, Nancy added. We might have some leads, said Michael, who now coordinated an informal job board for the community. I know a few businesses that are hiring, and right here in the neighborhood, people sometimes need occasional help. How does this help work? Anthony asked, clearly wary. It works like this, Margaret explained. All of us keep an eye out for job opportunities. When something comes up, we refer people in our community who are looking for work. And in return, once you're settled, you do the same for other families who come after you. That's all? That's all. And participating in community activities when you can and want to. Richard observed the conversation with satisfaction. The community had developed its own methods of integration, its own criteria for mutual support. Mr. Anthony, said Tommy, who had returned home for his college break, can I suggest something? Of course, son. You have experience with maintenance, right? There's always something here in the community that needs fixing. How about you start by offering those services right here in the neighborhood? Good idea, Michael chimed in. I actually need someone to fix a few things in my house. Me too, added Ms. Susan. There's a shower that's been acting up. For weeks. Anthony seemed excited about the possibilities. How much do you usually pay for this kind of work? It depends on the job, Michael explained. But we always try to pay a fair price, and sometimes we even barter. Barter? Trading services, Margaret clarified. You fix my shower, I cook for your family on Sunday. You paint Tommy's wall, he helps you with something you need. Does that really work? It does, Margaret confirmed, especially when people are short on cash but need to solve urgent problems. Nancy also perked up during the conversation. What about me? Are there any housekeeping opportunities? There are, said Jessica, the social worker. In fact, I have a few families on my list waiting for referrals of trustworthy people. How do you know I'm trustworthy? You barely know me. That's why we start small, Jessica explained. A few minor jobs first so everyone can get to know each other better. If it works out, then we move on to bigger things. And if it doesn't? Then we talk and figure out what went wrong. But it usually works when people are honest from the start. Richard was impressed by the maturity of the system the community had developed. It was an efficient method of integration that respected both newcomers and established members. After the meeting, Katie's parents seemed more hopeful. "Thank you for welcoming us so warmly," said Nancy. "That's how it works here," Margaret replied. "Everyone's needed help at some point, and everyone can help in some way too." "How do you know when someone really belongs to the community?" Anthony asked. "When they stop asking what they can get and start asking what they can give," Tommy answered with the wisdom of someone who had grown up in that environment. In the following days, Anthony began doing small repairs for families in the community. Nancy secured some cleaning jobs through Jessica's referrals. Katie and Kevin quickly integrated with the group of children. But 3 weeks later, the first complication arose. Anthony had volunteered to fix the electrical system in Mr. Roberts' house, one of the community's longest-standing members. During the work, there was an issue. A short circuit that damaged some of the household appliances. "It was my fault," Anthony admitted during an emergency meeting called by Margaret. "I thought I could handle electrical work, but I don't have enough experience." "The problem now is, how do we fix this?" asked Mr. Robert. "I lost a fridge and a microwave. I don't have the money to replace them." "I'll pay for it," Anthony said, "even if it takes me months to save up." "Anthony, you don't have the money to pay," his wife Nancy pointed out, "and we're depending on what you earn here to get by." The situation created a dilemma for the entire community. It was exactly the kind of problem that would test the strength of the mutual support system they had built. "Let's think together about a solution," said Margaret. "This is the kind of situation where our community needs to show what it's made of." "What do you mean?" asked Mr. Robert. Anthony made a mistake, but he was trying to help. And we all know mistakes happen. The question is, how do we fix it fairly for everyone? "I'll accept whatever solution you decide," said Anthony. "Me too," said Mr. Robert. "But I need those appliances," Richard observed. The discussion without interfering. It was important for the community itself to find solutions to its internal conflicts. "I have a proposal," said Michael. "What if the whole community organizes to replace Mr. Roberts' appliances? Each family contributes a little within their means." "But that wouldn't be fair," protested Anthony. "The mistake was mine." "Yes, but you're part of our community now," explained Michael. "And community means we share both successes and problems." "What about Anthony?" asked Ms. Susan. "He can't walk away without learning from this. Anthony will take a basic electrical course before touching wiring again," suggested Tommy. "And he'll help Mr. Robert with other tasks until things settle." "One more thing," added Margaret. "Anthony will share his experience with others in the community, so no one repeats the same mistake." The solution pleased everyone. It was fair, educational, and strengthened community bonds rather than weakening them. "I can contribute half the cost of the appliances," offered Richard. "You don't have to, Godfather," said Lily. "We can handle this ourselves." "I know you can. But I want to contribute because I'm part of this community too." "All right then," accepted Margaret. "But only half. The rest is our responsibility." The incident with Anthony ended up strengthening the community. They had proven they could handle internal conflicts maturely and constructively. But 2 weeks later, a much bigger problem arose. The city announced the area would be seized for a highway overpass. All families would have to move within 6 months. "What do you mean, seized?" asked Margaret during an emergency meeting. "They can't just kick us out of our homes." "They can," explained Jessica, who had researched the law. "The city has the right to seize property for public projects." "What about compensation?" asked Michael. "There is some, but it's usually well below market value, and rarely enough to buy another home in a comparable area." "Does this mean our community will scatter?" asked Tommy, visibly worried. Not necessarily, replied Margaret. We can try to organize, so we all move to the same area. Hi, but where, geese? Asked Miss Susan. Affordable homes aren't just anywhere. And even if we find an area with cheap houses, noted Michael, we have no guarantee the new neighborhood will accept our way of living as a community. The threat of dispersal was devastating. Everything they had built over years could be lost in months. Mr. Richard, said Margaret, do you know anyone at City Hall, someone who could help us understand this better? I know a few people, replied Richard, but I don't know if I can influence an eminent domain decision. We don't want you to influence it, clarified Tommy. We want you to help us understand our rights and options. I can do that. I'll arrange some meetings to get more detailed information. In the following days, Richard met with city architects, lawyers specializing in eminent domain, and even the councilman responsible for the overpass project. The information he gathered wasn't encouraging. The expropriation is irreversible, he explained to the community. The overpass project has already been approved, and there are federal funds involved. There's no way to stop it. What about the compensation? Asked Margaret. It'll be calculated based on the assessed property value, which is always lower than the market price, and you have 6 months to vacate. That's too short, Nancy remarked. It's the standard time frame for expropriations. It can be extended in exceptional cases, but that's hard to get. So what are our options? Michael asked. Basically 3, Richard explained. First, accept the compensation, and each family reorganizes individually somewhere else. Second, try to pool resources to buy nearby plots together. Third, look for an area where you can rebuild the community from scratch. Which do you think is most feasible? Tommy asked. Honestly, they're all difficult, but I think the third option has the best chance of preserving what you've built here. Where could we find a suitable area? Margaret asked. It'd have to be on the outskirts where land is cheaper, and it'd need to be a place where the local community is open to your way of life. Would you help us look for a place like that? Lily asked. Of course, but I want to be clear, this will be very hard. Rebuilding a community from scratch isn't easy. Harder than starting with nothing? Margaret said. We've done it once before. Margaret's determination inspired the rest of the community. If they had managed to build that support network once, they could do it again. But finding the right place proved more complicated than they imagined. The first area they visited was too far from job centers. Even with compensation, no one could afford daily transportation. The second area had a good location, but the land cost more than they could afford, even by pooling their compensation. The third area had affordable prices and a decent location, but when they visited, they realized the locals were hostile to outsiders. You're not from here, said a long-time resident, and we don't want you bringing your different ideas here. What different ideas? Margaret asked. This business of everyone meddling in each other's lives. Here people mind their own business. It was the opposite of what they wanted, an individualistic community that wouldn't tolerate their philosophy of mutual support. After 2 months of searching, they still hadn't found a viable option. The eviction deadline was approaching and desperation began to set in for some families. Maybe we should accept that our community has come to an end, Miss Susan said during a meeting. Maybe it's time for each family to go their own way. Don't say that, Lily protested. Our family can't split up now. Lily, sweetheart, sometimes life forces changes we don't want, Miss Susan said gently. But you always said family is who chooses to stay together. Are you choosing to separate? Lily asked, tears in her eyes. Her question silenced the room. The children were just as distressed by the possibility of separation as the adults. Lily's right, Tommy said. We can't give up just because it's hard. But Tommy, son, we haven't found any suitable place, Michael argued. Then let's look differently, Emma suggested. Instead of searching for an existing place, what if we create a new one? What do you mean, Emma? Asked Margaret. I don't know yet, but there must be some way to create a new community instead of fitting into an existing one. Emma's idea brought a new perspective to the discussion. Instead of trying to adapt to existing communities, maybe they could create a completely new one. Is that possible? Margaret asked Richard. It's possible, but it's much more complex and expensive. How would it work? You'd have to buy land big enough for all the families, then divide the land into lots, then build the houses, and then create all the community infrastructure. How much would something like that cost? Asked Michael. Much more than you have available with the compensation money. How much more? Richard did some quick calculations. About 3 times more than the total amount of all the compensations combined. Then it's impossible, concluded Anthony. Not necessarily, Richard said thoughtfully. Let me look into some possibilities. In the following days, Richard researched housing cooperatives, government programs for affordable housing, and funding options for community projects. What he found was promising but complicated. There's a federal program for housing cooperatives, he explained at the next meeting. If you organize as a cooperative, you can access special funding. How does it work? Asked Margaret. You form a housing cooperative. The cooperative buys a large plot of land. The land is divided into lots for each family. Each family pays a monthly installment that includes the house financing, plus a fee for maintaining the community infrastructure. And is it affordable? Asked Nancy. It depends. The installments would be higher than what you pay in rent now, but lower than a traditional home loan. And how long would it take to organize this? Asked Michael. Between 6 months and a year. It depends on the bureaucracy and project approval. But we have to leave here in 4 months, Tommy pointed out. That's the problem. You'd need a temporary place to live while organizing the cooperative. Where could we stay temporarily? Asked Margaret. That's the hardest part. You'd have to find temporary rentals, probably in different places, but trying to keep the community together. The idea of the housing cooperative was attractive, but the logistics of implementing it were daunting. Mr. Anderson, Margaret said, can you help us with the extra costs of this project? I can help with part of it, but I can't cover everything. It would be a very large amount. How much could you contribute? Maybe 1/3 of the total cost. But you'd have to get the rest through the cooperative and other sources. And if we can't, asked Ms. Susan, then you'd have wasted time and money and still be without a place to live. The decision was risky. Betting on creating the cooperative could result in success or total failure. Let's vote, Margaret suggested. Each family decides whether to bet on the cooperative or go their own way. The vote was tense. In the end, 8 of the 12 families decided to bet on the cooperative. 4 families, including Anthony and Nancy's, decided the risk was too great. We understand your decision, Margaret told the families who chose to leave. And we respect it, but we hope to stay in touch. Of course, Anthony replied. You'll always be our family, even if we don't live in the same place. The separation was painful but civil. The 4 families who left would receive their full compensation and look for housing individually. The remaining 8 families, including Margaret's, Michael's, and other longtime community members, began the process of creating the cooperative. Tommy, who was on break from university, took on most of the bureaucratic research. I found something interesting, he said. In a meeting. There's a type of cooperative called a social cooperative that has extra benefits. What kind of benefits? Asked Margaret. Access to specific funding for social projects and priority in housing programs. What do we need to do to qualify as a social cooperative? Prove our project has a positive social impact and include activities that benefit the wider community, not just the members. What kind of activities? A community center, daycare, vocational courses, things like that. The idea of expanding the project to include broader social impact excited everyone. Does that mean we could keep doing the community work we already do here, but on a bigger scale? Asked Michael. Exactly, and we could take in other families who need support like we did here. So our community could grow instead of shrink, asked Lily. That's right, Tommy replied. The project was evolving from a forced relocation into an opportunity to expand and formalize the community work they were already doing. But making this vision a reality proved extremely challenging. First, they needed to find suitable land. Then, they had to draft a full technical proposal. After that, they needed approval from the relevant authorities, and throughout the process they had to find temporary housing. Everyone, Richard said in a meeting. "I need to be honest with you. This project is far more complex than I first thought." "How so?" asked Margaret. "The bureaucracy is overwhelming. There are dozens of documents, approvals, permits, and any mistake could set us back months." "Are you giving up?" asked Tommy. "I'm not giving up. But I realize we need specialized professional help." "What kind of help?" "An architect experienced with cooperatives, a lawyer specializing in social housing, an accountant familiar with cooperatives, a social worker to document the project's impact." "How much would it cost to hire all these professionals?" asked Michael. "A lot. More than you have available." "So we're at a crossroads," Margaret observed. "We need professional help to make this happen, but we can't afford it." "Exactly, and time is running out." They had just 2 months before eviction. If they didn't find a solution soon, they'd have to accept scattered temporary housing, which would likely break up the community. Then Jessica, the social worker, brought unexpected news. "Everyone, I found something that might help," she said in an emergency meeting. "What?" they all asked eagerly. "There's a university in the city with an outreach program called the Social Projects Incubator." "How does it work?" asked Margaret. "Students in architecture, law, business, and social work on real social projects as part of their coursework. It's supervised by professors, but there's no fee." "Would they work on our project?" asked Tommy. "If the project gets accepted, yes. They'd provide all the technical support we need." "What's the criteria for acceptance?" asked Richard. "Significant social impact, technical feasibility, and potential to be replicated elsewhere." "Does our project fit?" asked Michael. "Perfectly," Jessica replied, "but we have to submit a full proposal in 2 weeks." 2 weeks to prepare a full proposal?" said Margaret. "How will we manage?" "By working day and night," Tommy answered, "and dividing tasks among everyone." The next 2 weeks were intense. Each member of the community took on specific responsibilities in preparing the proposal. Margaret was in charge of documenting the community's history and the mutual support model they had developed. Michael organized information about the housing needs of the families and the criteria for selecting new residents. Tommy researched legal frameworks, available government programs, and successful cooperative models. Emma created visual materials to illustrate the proposal, including sketches of how they envisioned the new community. Lily and the other children filmed video interviews, explaining how community life had impacted their lives. Richard and Jennifer helped with drafting financial spreadsheets and implementation timelines. Jessica coordinated the entire process and ensured the proposal followed the university's required formats. When they finally submitted the proposal, everyone was exhausted but hopeful. "Now we wait," said Margaret, "and hope they accept it." "What if they don't?" asked Lily. "Then we'll think of other options," Margaret replied. "But let's hope they do." The response came a week later. "Congratulations," the coordinator of the Social Projects Incubator told Jessica over the phone. "Your project has been accepted. It's one of the most interesting we've ever received." The news was met with celebration. Finally, they had a real chance to make the cooperative happen, but the work was just beginning. The first meeting with the university team revealed the complexity of what lay ahead. "Conceptually, you have a very strong project," said the lead professor, "but we need to address several practical issues." "What kind of issues?" asked Margaret. "First, location. You need to find land suitable for the project that fits within the available budget. Second, timeline. You have 1 month to leave your current homes, but the cooperative project will take at least 8 months to complete. Third, funding. Even with government programs, there's still not enough money to cover everything you want. "Does that mean the project isn't feasible?" asked Michael. "No, it means we need to be creative and flexible." The professor suggested some alternatives. First, implement the project in phases. Start with basic temporary housing, then gradually improve the infrastructure. Second, reduce the initial scope. Instead of including a community center and other extra structures, focus only on housing for now. Third, seek additional partnerships. Companies, NGOs, or other institutions that could contribute resources or services. "Which option do you think is most viable?" asked Tommy. I think a combination of all three, the professor replied. Start small, grow gradually, and always look for new partnerships. But where will we live during construction? Asked Margaret. That's something you'll have to figure out. The university can help find alternatives, but it can't cover rent. The issue of temporary housing remained unresolved. With only 3 weeks left before mandatory eviction, they still didn't know where they'd live during the 8 months of construction. Then an unexpected offer came. "Mr. Richard," said Father Patrick, the local parish priest, "I heard you're having trouble finding temporary housing." "Yes, Father, we're looking for options. Our parish has a large lot behind the church. It's not being used for anything right now. Would you like to set up temporary housing there?" "Temporary housing like what?" "Shipping containers or prefabricated homes. Something simple but decent, just for the transition. Period." "Would the city allow that?" asked Margaret. "I'll check. But I believe so, considering it's a social emergency situation." "And how much would it cost?" asked Michael. "Nothing. It would be our contribution to your project." Father Patrick's offer solved the most urgent problem, but it also created new challenges. "A container is no place for a family to live," observed Ms. Susan. "It's temporary," reminded Margaret. "And it's better than being on the street or having to separate." "How many families could fit on the church's property?" asked Tommy. "We'll check," said Father Patrick, "but I believe all 8 families." In the following days, they organized the logistics of the temporary move. Each family would have a 20-square-meter container. Bathrooms and the kitchen would be shared. "It'll be tight," admitted Margaret, "but we've lived through worse. And it'll only be for a short time," added Michael. 8 months at most. "The important thing is we'll stay together," said Lily, "and keep working on our dream." Moving to the containers was emotionally difficult. Leaving the homes where they had built so many memories wasn't easy. "We're leaving, but we're taking what matters most," said Margaret on their last day in the old house. "What matters most?" asked Lily. "Our family, our unity, our dreams." Life in the containers proved to be a daily challenge. Space was limited, privacy almost non-existent, and conflicts multiplied. "I can't stand hearing Mr. Roberts snoring anymore," complained Miss Susan after a week. "And I can't stand tripping over the kids' things," grumbled Michael. "Everyone," said Margaret in an emergency meeting, "if we don't get better organized, our community will fall apart before the cooperative is even ready." "What do you suggest?" asked Tommy. "Clear rules for living together, schedules for shared spaces, and a lot of patience with each other." They created a rotation system for the kitchen, quiet hours, and weekly meetings to resolve conflicts before they escalated. "Remember, this is temporary," Richard would say whenever tensions rose, "and you're doing this for a bigger dream." Meanwhile, work on the cooperative progressed slowly. The university team had found a suitable plot on the outskirts, but bureaucratic hurdles remained. "The approval process is taking longer than expected," explained the university professor. "The city is being very strict with permits." "Why?" asked Margaret. "Innovative projects always face more bureaucratic resistance. Officials don't know how to categorize you under existing regulations." "Will this delay the timeline significantly?" asked Michael. "Possibly. Instead of 8 months, we might need 10 or 12. The news that they'd have to stay in the containers longer left everyone disheartened. "I don't know if I can take another 4 months like this," said Ms. Susan. "You have to," Margaret replied firmly. "The alternative is giving up everything." "Maybe giving up would be better," someone muttered. "Don't say that," protested Lily. "We've come so far." "Lily's right," Tommy agreed. "Quitting now would mean throwing away everything we've built." But tensions kept rising. Forced closeness in tight spaces was testing everyone's patience. The breaking point came 2 months after moving to the containers. Ms. Susan and Michael had a serious argument over kitchen use. The fight escalated, and others took sides. "Enough!" Margaret shouted during the clash. "Enough of this childishness." "Childishness?" Miss Susan shot back. "Who do you think you are, calling me childish? I'm someone trying to keep this family together while you all fight over nonsense." "Nonsense? Living under these conditions is no joke." "It's no joke, but fighting instead of looking for solutions is foolish." The argument between Margaret and Ms. Susan marked the lowest point in the container community's coexistence. That night, an emergency meeting was held. "Let's be honest," said Margaret. "We're at our limit. If we don't find a way to improve our situation, our community will fall apart." "What can we do?" asked Michael. "This is just how things are. We can improve our organization, we can be more tolerant with each other, and we can remind ourselves why we're doing this." "And if we can't?" asked Ms. Susan. "Then each family decides whether to stay or leave the cooperative." "Are you giving an ultimatum?" asked Michael. "I'm being realistic. If we can't live together now, how will we ever build a bigger community later?" The meeting resulted in a new living agreement, clearer rules, consequences for those who broke them, and a mediation system to resolve conflicts. "Let's give it 2 more weeks," Margaret decided. "If things don't improve, we'll discuss alternatives." The next 2 weeks were tense but better. The new agreements worked, and people began adapting to life in the containers. But then a new complication arose. One of the university team members graduated and left the project. "Will this delay the process even more?" asked Tommy. "Unfortunately, yes," replied the professor. "We'll have to train a new student, and that takes time." "How much time?" "At least another month." The news of further delays crushed the community's morale. "We're being tested," Margaret said in a meeting, "and tests exist to see if our determination is real." "How long will we be tested?" asked Miss Susan. "Until we prove. We deserve what we're fighting for." It was during this period of deep discouragement that something unexpected happened. A TV report about the community aired, showing their living conditions in the containers and their struggle to build the cooperative. The response was immediate. "Ms. Margaret," the reporter said over the phone, "you've received multiple offers of help after the report." "What kind of help?" "Cash donations, job offers, even partnership proposals for the cooperative." "Really?" "Absolutely. A construction company offered to work for free. A hardware store wants to donate materials, and many individuals are willing to contribute." The shift in their situation was drastic. In 1 week, they received more support than they had in months of work. "This is wonderful," said Michael. "But it's also scary." "Why scary?" asked Lily. "Because now we have to prove we deserve all this trust," Tommy replied. "And because high expectations can turn into high pressure," Margaret added. With the new support, the cooperative's timeline accelerated. Bureaucratic approvals moved faster, financial resources became sufficient, and construction could start sooner than expected. "In 4 months, you'll be able to move into permanent homes," announced the university professor. "4 months from now?" asked Margaret. "That's right. And with all the community infrastructure you dreamed of." The news brought relief and renewed excitement to the community, but it also brought added responsibilities. "Now that we have resources and visibility," Richard said in a meeting, "you need to decide how to use this opportunity." "What do you mean?" asked Michael. "You could focus only on solving your own situation, or you could use this chance to create something that inspires other communities." "What do you suggest?" asked Tommy. "That you document the entire process. Let them create a model that can be replicated. Let them become a reference in social cooperatives." "Isn't that too much responsibility?" asked Margaret. "It is, but you've already proven you can handle big responsibilities." The community decided to accept the challenge. They began systematically documenting the entire process of creating the cooperative, from the first steps to the final implementation. "Let's do this right," said Margaret, "so other families can learn from our experience." The next 4 months were intense. The construction of the cooperative progressed quickly, but also required constant involvement from the community. Each family actively participated in decisions about the layout of the homes, the design of shared spaces, and the organization of the infrastructure. "I never thought building my own house would be so much work," Michael remarked. "But I also never thought it would be so rewarding," Margaret replied. "We're literally building our future with our own hands," Tommy observed. During this time, the children also took on important roles. Lily created a cooperative newsletter, documenting the construction progress. Emma made technical drawings that were included in the architectural plans. Tommy organized a communication system between the community and the construction team. "You're all growing so much through this experience," Jennifer noted. "We're learning that building a community is about so much more than just Building houses, Lily answered. How so? We're learning to make decisions together, solve problems together, and dream together. When the day finally came to move into their permanent homes, the emotion was indescribable. I can't believe we did it, Margaret said, standing in front of her new house. Oh, you believe it, Richard replied, because you fought for this for 2 years. 2 years that felt like 20, Michael joked. But it was worth it, Tommy added. The new community was exactly as they had dreamed. Each family had its own home, but there were generous shared spaces, a community center, a children's play area, a community garden, a library, and even a small industrial kitchen for events. It's even prettier than I imagined, Lily said, running through the spaces. And functional, Emma noted. Every space has a purpose, but everything is connected. The best part, Margaret said, is that it was built with our own love and hard work. In the first months in their new community, they focused on settling in and organizing daily life. But soon, they began receiving visits from people interested in learning about the project. How did you do it? Every visitor asked. With persistence, teamwork, and a lot of patience, Margaret always replied. And with the support of people who believed in us, Michael added. But mostly with the certainty that family is more important than any hardship, Tommy finished. The cooperative's success brought recognition. They were invited to give talks, hosted researchers, and became a reference for innovative social projects. But what mattered most to them was that they had preserved and expanded the community values they had built years earlier. Richard, Margaret said one day, do you remember when we first met? I do. You were suspicious of everything. And I was right to be suspicious. But I was also wrong. How so? I was right, because there really are people who promise help and then disappear. But I was wrong to think you were one of them. What made you change your mind? Time. And mostly the fact that you never tried to control us or turn us into something we weren't. You changed me far more than I changed you. That's the truth. But the transformation was mutual, and that's what makes our relationship special. 2 years after the move to the cooperative, they organized a big celebration. The party brought together everyone who had been part of the journey. The families who had chosen not to join the cooperative, the university professionals, Father Patrick, Jessica, the old neighbors, and even some of the people who had offered help after the TV report. Looking back, said Tommy during a speech at the party, it's amazing to see how many people contributed to getting us here. And looking ahead, added Emma, it's exciting to imagine how much more we can grow and help others. The most important thing, said Lily, is that we've proven family isn't determined by blood or money. It's determined by choice and love. During the party, Richard had time to reflect on the whole journey. It had all started with a simple observation: Michael feeding 3 children on the street. That observation had sparked his curiosity. The curiosity had turned into involvement. The involvement had created bonds. The bonds had led to commitment. The commitment had resulted in a complete life transformation. What are you thinking about? Asked Jennifer, sitting beside him. I'm thinking about how small decisions can have huge consequences. What small decision? The decision to leave the office that day to observe Michael up close. If I had just kept watching from the window, none of this would have happened. Do you regret anything? I don't regret a thing. But I'm amazed at how life can completely change from a moment of genuine attention. And what's the most important thing you've learned through all this? I've learned that true happiness isn't an individual achievement. It's a collective effort. What would you do differently if you could start over? Nothing. Every mistake, every struggle, every moment of doubt was necessary to get us where we are. And what are your plans for the future? Try to keep learning, to keep growing alongside this family we've chosen, and maybe help others discover what we've discovered. Which is that everyone can make a difference in someone's life. You don't need to be rich or powerful. You just need to be attentive, genuine, and willing to truly engage. The week after the party, Margaret approached Richard for a private conversation. Richard, I want to make you a proposal. What proposal? How about we formalize our work? Supporting other communities. How do you mean? Create an organization that can replicate our experience elsewhere. Use everything we've learned to help other families build their own communities. That would be wonderful, but it's a big responsibility. It is, but it would also be a way to give back everything we've received. How would it work? I'm still thinking, but I imagine something like a training center for social cooperatives, a place where other communities can come to learn and where we can organize our methodology. Do you think our community would be willing to take on that responsibility? I'll talk to everyone, but I think so. We already get a lot of visitors and requests for help. Maybe it's time to organize it better. Margaret's proposal was presented at a community meeting and unanimously accepted. Let's do it, said Michael, but let's do it right, with planning, structure, and methodology. And always remembering that every situation is unique, added Tommy. We can't impose our model on different realities. In the following months, they developed a social cooperative training program. The program included workshops on community organizing, participatory planning sessions, and technical support for communities that wanted to create their own cooperatives. The most important thing, Margaret explained to each new group that arrived, isn't to copy what we did, it's to understand the principles behind what we did. What principles? So they always asked. Genuine participation from everyone, collective decision-making, respect for individual differences, long-term commitment, and always remembering that the goal is autonomy, not dependence. The training center became a success. Within 2 years, they had supported the creation of 12 similar cooperatives in different regions. We're building a network, observed Tommy, who had become the center's technical coordinator. A network of families who've chosen to build life in community, added Emma, who had taken on responsibility for the project's documentation and communication. And the best part, said Lily, is that each new cooperative creates its own solutions. We just help with the methodology. 5 years after the original cooperative was founded, they organized the first national meeting of social cooperatives. The event brought together representatives from all the cooperatives they had helped establish, along with researchers, policymakers interested in the model, and people from other regions who wanted to learn about it. When we started all this, Richard said during the opening remarks, our goal was simple, to find a way for 3 children to keep being fed. Today, Margaret continued, we have over 300 families living in social cooperatives based on the principles we developed together. But the most important thing, Michael added, is that each of these families has discovered it's possible to live differently, with more solidarity, more participation, more dignity. During the meeting, studies on the impact of the social cooperatives were presented. The results were impressive. Reduction of extreme poverty among participating families, improved educational outcomes for children, increased political and social engagement in communities, development of local leadership, creation of sustainable mutual support networks. The numbers matter, commented one researcher, but what's most striking is the qualitative transformation in people's lives. How so? Someone in the audience asked. People discover they're capable of far more than they imagined. They learn they can actively shape their own future. They realize they can make a difference in others' lives. Does that have a name? Another participant asked. It does. It's called genuine community empowerment. On the final day of the meeting, children and young people from the various cooperatives gave a special presentation. We want to tell you what it's like growing up in a social cooperative, said Lily, now 17 and about to start university. First, continued Emma, 15, we learn that everyone matters. Kids, adults, elders, everyone has something to contribute. Second, said Tommy, now 21 with a degree in business administration, we learn that problems are opportunities to grow, not reasons to despair. Third, said Kevin, Carol's brother, now 13, we learn that family is much bigger than we thought. It can include so many people who weren't born into it. Fourth, said Charlotte, Michael's daughter, now 15, we learn that helping others is the best way to feel good about yourself. And fifth, Lily concluded, we learn it's possible to build a better world, starting with our own community. The children and young people's presentation moved everyone at the meeting. Thus they are living proof that our work is worth it, Margaret said to Richard. They're more than that, Richard replied. They're the guarantee that this model will keep going even when we're no longer here. Why? Because they've experienced the benefits of community life firsthand. When they start their own families, they'll want to recreate those values. At the end of the meeting, the National Network of Social Cooperatives was formed, with representatives from all existing cooperatives and a permanent program for sharing experiences. Now we're no longer just an isolated experiment, Tommy noted. We're part of a social movement. A movement that started with a delivery man sharing food with 3 kids, Michael added. And grew because a businessman chose curiosity over indifference, Margaret continued. And took root because a group of people decided family matters more than any hardship, Richard finished. 6 months after the national meeting, Richard got an unexpected call. Mr. Richard, it's Tommy. Hi, Tommy, how are you? I'm good. Actually, I'm great. I wanted to share some news with you. What news? I got a really interesting job offer. What kind of offer? A federal university wants to create an undergraduate program in social cooperativism, and they want me to be one of the professors. Tommy, that's wonderful. Are you going to accept? I am, but first I wanted to say thank you. Thank me for what? Everything, for stopping to look when you saw Michael feeding us, for truly getting involved with our family, for teaching us that dreaming big and making those dreams come true is possible. Tommy, you all were the ones who taught me. You showed me a life with purpose is far better than just a comfortable one. Then we taught each other. Exactly. And the best part is, this mutual learning will keep happening in other families, other communities. Godfather Richard? Yes? When I'm a professor, I'll tell my students it all started with one simple act of genuine care. A man who chose to step out of his office to understand what was happening on the street. Fairthemas, and I'll tell anyone who'll listen that I found true happiness when I stopped looking only at myself and started seeing the people around me. 2 years later, when Tommy was already teaching at the university, he organized a special class. Today, he told his students, you'll meet the people who created the social cooperativism model we study in theory. Richard, Margaret, Michael, Emma, Lily, and other members of the original cooperative went to the university to share their story with the new generation of cooperators. The question you're probably asking, Margaret said to the students, is how can you replicate our experience? And the answer, Richard continued, is you can't replicate it, but you can let it inspire you to create your own. How? A student asked. By paying attention to the people around you, Michael answered, seeing real needs, building genuine relationships. And most of all, Lily added, remembering that small acts of kindness can grow into big social changes. But only if they're sincere, Emma emphasized, motivated by love, not obligation. After class, a student approached Richard. Mr. Richard, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you consider yourself a special person? Someone with exceptional qualities? No, I'm just an ordinary person who was lucky enough to pay attention at the right time. Does that mean anyone could do what you've done? It means anyone can start. The rest depends on persistence, patience, and a willingness to learn from others. What if I wanted to start something similar in my town? Start small. Get to know one person, one family, a specific situation, and let reality itself teach you what to do. That's it? That's it. But it's also everything. 10 years after their first meeting, Richard and Michael found themselves back where it all began. The underground passage had been transformed into a community square. A small plaque told the story. Here began a journey of social transformation that inspired hundreds of families across the country. It's strange being here, Michael said. Why? Richard asked. Because it feels like yesterday, but also like another lifetime. It was another lifetime. The life before we knew each other. Do you miss anything from that old life? No, and you? No. The only thing I feel is gratitude. Gratitude for what? For finding people who taught me life could be so much richer than I ever imagined. And I'm grateful for finding people who taught me that true wealth isn't measured in money. They stood in silence for a few minutes watching children play in the square. Richard, Michael finally said, do Do you think our story will inspire others? I think it already has, but I hope it inspires even more. Why? Because the world needs more stories like ours. Stories that show it's possible to live differently. How? By paying more attention to one another, by being willing to get involved, by having the courage to build real connections. And do you think people are ready for that? I think people are hungry for it, they just don't know how to start. How can they start? The same way we did, by paying attention, by staying curious, by being willing to step out of their comfort zones. When they said goodbye that day, both knew the story they had built together would keep multiplying through all the lives they had touched. And they were right. 15 years after that first meeting, there are now over 100 social cooperatives across the country, inspired by their model. Thousands of families have discovered more dignified and caring ways to live. Hundreds of young people have graduated from social cooperative programs, and a new generation is growing up with strong community values. Richard, now 67, remains active in the cooperative network, but in a more advisory role. Jennifer has become a national leader in community education. Ms. Margaret oversees the national network. Michael developed his own methodology for community integration. Tommy holds a PhD in social development and has written 3 books on cooperatives. Emma became an architect specializing in social housing projects. Lily works as a social worker, supporting vulnerable children. But the most important thing isn't the titles or recognition they've received. The most important thing is that deep in their hearts, they all know their lives have purpose, meaning, and a positive impact on the world. And it all started with one man who decided to step out of his office to understand why a delivery driver was feeding 3 children on the street. Days earned. Now, tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share, leave us an honest comment. Do you think Richard made the right choice by getting involved with Ms. Margaret's family? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like this video and most importantly subscribe so you don't miss other inspiring stories.